So it's I said 6:07. Marlene's here now. I think probably everyone that's going to be here to begin with is here. And at this point, we've done 2 of these, but I'm still seeing some new faces. And then a couple of students of mine, students/friends of mine, in various aspects of their lives, are here to join us. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through and give some introductions. We can focus primarily on those of you who have not attended one of my discussions up to this point. And then for those of you who have, I still want you to just kind of say your name and what group you're with. But for those of you who haven't, I want you to say your name and what group you're with and how much martial arts experience you have and why you're interested in fencing or historical martial arts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm just going to go down the list in the order that I see you on my computer. And I guess that means that we will start with Jessie Lange.
Okay, let's see. So my name is Jessie Lange. I'm a guitar player. I have sporadic and varied martial arts history. My fencing experience is two weekend things that I did with James. So close to 0 qualifications there, if exquisitely expert instruction. That's what I got.
Thanks, Jesse. Okay, I still thank you, Jesse. I still don't know Knight of the Green's given name. Maybe he'll offer that here. He's
Kirk, K-A-R-K, like Captain Kirk.
Awesome. Oh no, and so now tell us about yourself.
Oh, okay. Oh, next on the list. Okay. So when it comes to martial arts background, okay, let me just try to start, make it concise. Basically, love video games and playing them. And I was playing the game Demon Souls, Dark Souls, those type of hardcore medieval fantasy type games. And I thought to myself about 11 years ago, hey, how realistic is this? So I bought just some manuals, pretty basic stuff, played around with some of my friends and stuff for several years. And one of my friends who studies ninjutsu for about 15 years, he said, why don't you find a dedicated school where you can actually learn more so of the terminology, because you understand the principle, but not the deeper meaning behind it. So about 3 years ago, I joined CKDF to sort of learn more about the, history, not just the overarching idea behind it. So yeah. Great. And I'm trying to use that information in order to apply it to so essentially I'm just working on an animation project where it's rotoscope martial arts and trying to use that sort of say, hey, look how cool this stuff actually is. Getting more people involved in it from the communities from video games. So that's just where I'm at right now.
Great, thanks. That's exactly the kind of background I was looking for. Liz, I don't remember if you go by Liz, but I remember you. But why don't you just remind the rest of us who you are real quick?
Okay, Liz Suko. I've been at CKDF for about 5 years now. Previous martial arts experience, a little bit of Italian style fencing in college and a bit of karate here and there.
Great. And how long have you been with CKDF? I don't remember.
About 5 years. I think it was okay. Yeah. October 20. Oh, coming up on 6. October 2015.
Great, thanks. Kara, nice to meet you.
Hello, it's nice to meet you as well. This is my second event with CKDF. I attended talk about Coaches Corners a little while ago as well. My background is mostly in fencing. I train out here in the East Kingdom of the SCA, but I also, since the pandemic made it more tenable to do this, have been attending classes with Valkyrie Western Martial Arts Assembly, even though they're in Vancouver and I'm here in Boston. So I've been working with Kaya Sadowski for about 6 months now as well. So that's my
Great.
deal.
Cool, awesome. Hi, Marlene.
Hi.
Who are
Sorry for
you?
being late. I am currently, newly elected chair of CKDF.
Woo!
Yeah, that's new and still kind of scary, but we're gonna embrace it. My background is primarily in dancing. My key areas of study were the Cicchetti method of ballet. I did about a year of point, graduated the first level of professional in their exam series. Irish step dancing, like river dance, think Michael Flatley, whatever. I did that for about 4 or 5 years before we left Virginia Beach and moved up to Maryland, where the Cicchetti kind of took precedence. And no real martial arts background. It was just the dancing and some volleyball. And I've been with CKDF for 4 years, plus
Great.
or minus.
Great. Angelica?
Sorry, my camera's over here, but I should move Zoom. Let me do that. Hi. I've been with CKDF for a little bit over a year, but my background is in foil. I was a foilist for 5 or 6 years and then was introduced to this and I went, this looks more violent and fun. And I think the most martial arts training I've had is I did give a girl a sword right before COVID hit. So Marlene got to teach me like very, very basic ringing, and that's about it.
Cool. Great. Thank you, Angelica. John Charles?
Hi, I'm John Charles Bauschatz. I'm in Milwaukee and have about 5 or 6 years of experience doing Lichtenauer longsword up there. Dropped by James's from time to time for some longsword. I think post-COVID, I'll probably be doing longsword outside of the school that I've been with all this time. So just kind of floating around in parks and stuff, or running by James's house for some longsword. And then I do some Irish and Scottish music on flute and bagpipes. So I'm kind of just orbiting James all the time, just this intersectional friendship. So I'm here for that intersection, very excited. I guess that's the whole thing.
That's a good point there. I don't know who Capital Kunstes Festens is. Apparently it's not Marlene, but I don't.
It is me. It's just the admin that
Okay.
opens the room.
Okay, so Brent, who are you?
All right. Hi, I'm Brent. I've been to the past 2 lectures in this series, but I'm an instructor at CKDF. I don't really have a prior background in fencing or any sports activity, but I've been with CKDF for about 5 or 6 years now.
Great, thank you.
And you're on the council?
Yes.
And you're also chief maitre d' when Marlene is offline.
Yeah, I guess so.
John Durish.
Hi. Let me go backwards in time. I've been with CKDF since about 2014. That was about 2 years after I got out of the Marine Corps. I was in the Marine Corps from 2012 to 1989. Over that span, I ran into, if it's a martial art, I probably ran into it some way or shape or the other. Favorite time was had a Filipino Marine with me in Iraq, and he was teaching me Filipino stick knife fighting. Dangerous fellow. Backwards before that, I got exposed to D&D in 1983 when D&D was labeled a devil worshipping thing in sewage tunnels because people were doing weird things down in sewer tunnels. And ever since then, I was fascinated with the notion of actually picking up something and swinging it and making things as well, making swords out of sticks or spears or you name it. So yeah, that's the long rundown. And I'm particularly interested in this class tonight because I'm recovering from reconstructive surgery on my right ankle. And folks like Marlene and other folks have shown me the value of dance in really understanding the fine muscle movements that occur, not just in your strong muscles like your quads or your thighs, but also the tiny muscles in your ankles and your the sides of your knees. So definitely interested to hear what you got to say tonight.
Great, thanks. Joe?
Hey, I'm Joe Lilly. I've been with CKDF for about 5 years now, mostly KDF longsword, but played around with a few other things as well. Little bit of sport fencing background and some judo and other martial arts, but nothing too long term.
Great, thanks, perfect. Jason?
Hey, I've just started with CKDF maybe 4 months, 5 months before the pandemic. And I just started getting into it when the pandemic hit. I've been trying to keep up with it ever since, with varying degrees of success given my other schedules. Not too much background other than that, other than just kind of thinking sword play is cool my whole life and finally taking the plunge and getting into actually studying it and figuring it out. So looking forward to hearing this lecture.
Excellent, thank you. Charles?
Hey, so let's see, going back in time, I've been with CKDF for about maybe 6.5 years. Mostly KDF focused, a few detours, but like 90% early KDF. Before that, and kind of still ongoing, is a bunch of dance. I've been dancing about 11, 12 years, primarily the Lindy Hop, swing, kind of African-American vernacular jazz dances. So like the Charleston, that kind of thing, and also kind of regional dances of the area, throughout the US at the time. And then before that, I would say about 10 years of martial arts of various flavors, but Eastern martial arts, Kendo, primary one was Kendo for about 5 years. And then, but that was ongoing with college, so that was a bit hard. And then Kung Fu and Taekwondo is kind of like the first base, the first things that I did. And then kind of a detour through Aikido for about 2 years. And cool. Yeah, that's it.
Great, thanks, Charles. Ariana, is that how I pronounce that?
It's Ariane, but close enough.
Ariane, sorry. Please tell us about yourself, Ariane.
So I did like 10 weeks with CKDF like a year ago when I was doing an internship in DC, which was really nice. I did like a little bit of wushu and stuff when I was a kid. Did ballet as a kid. Did a lot of Latin dances in like middle school, high school, and in college. Most of the time it was like Balkan style folk dance. There's a whole international folk dance class in college that really, there's just so much to it. Fencing in high school, fencing in college, and yeah, that's about it. And I'm out here in California. I miss you guys.
Where in California are you, Ariane?
I'm in the Bay Area.
Okay, please reach out to me. You can just find me on Facebook, friend me on Facebook or whatever, send me a message. I have a few contacts out there that might be useful if you're gonna be in the Bay Area long-term for you to know and meet up with and potentially start training with if that's where you're gonna be.
Yeah, this is where my family is, and I already joined the Fremont Frifectors. Jude Ledesma is the guy who recommended CKDF to me, like, all that time ago before I went to DC.
Cool. That's good. Yeah. All right, great. Thank you. Matthew McCaffrey?
That's me. I'm here. Is my microphone working?
It is.
Yep, you're great.
All right.
So a little bit about you.
I'm Ariane's fencing rival and partner from out here in California. She told me all about CKDF while she was over there. And I do fencing, did a bit of kendo. I'm not much of a dancer, but I've been, at least before plague happened, I was studying longsword, Meyer longsword with Jude Ledesma out here with the Fremont Frifectors.
Great.
Yeah, that's about it from me. I got 2 left feet, but fencing seems to help me with that.
Great. All right, cool. So everyone here, I think, knows me. Certainly, you've heard of me. Certainly, you at least heard of me when you were signing up to attend this class. But a little bit about my background. I've been involved in historical fencing since 2009 when I watched the movie Reclaiming the Blade. I immediately dropped $600 worth of $600 on fencing gear that I had no outlet to use in. But I found a club out in Washington State, and then when I moved to Wisconsin, where I am now, I connected with the Wisconsin Historical Fencing Association, which is a federation here. And then eventually, I was in the military, so when I was getting out of the military, I decided I needed to have a club. So my dream was always like I was going to get stationed at this sort of mythical place that had a thriving and bustling historical fencing club. Basically, Virginia like would have been the way that I could have achieved that. But like anywhere else, it was just hopeless. So that's sort of neither here nor there, because I got out and I stayed in Wisconsin. And so the only opportunity I had was to start my own club, which is what I did. And we've been operating here for 6 years. So since 2015 is when I got out and when I started my chapter of the federation I'm in. My background is, I began with Fiore in Washington State, but I quickly sort of, I was using a lot of the resources that had been published, and there wasn't a ton of Fiore back then. There was a little bit, but the primary sort of way of conceiving of yourself as a historical fencer was through like identification with the German Kunstfestens, and so that's what I did. And at one point in my Hemer tenure, it was German, like, so everything that was German was what I did. I did German fencing, and then at some point that changed from German fencing to the fencing of Johannes Lichtenauer, and then at some point that changed to the Kunstfestens, which extends throughout the period, so from about 1450 to 1570, and covers like a lot of what was the Holy Roman Empire at the time. And so essentially German fencing, but a more informed version of that, right, for what that's worth. And I've done a lot of work interpreting Lichtenauer. I've done a lot of work interpreting Meyer. And I'm very interested in sort of reconstructing the whole system, such as is possible, right? Really having a coherent picture of what the system is trying to tell us. But that being said, that's not the focus of today's discussion. So, you know, and get with me some other time, some other place, and we will definitely talk. I will talk your ear off about what Lichtenauer is trying to tell us, or what Kunstfestens, the 5 words mean, all that stuff. And there's more than a few people in this chat room that I've spent many hours telling what I think Kunstfestens means. But that's not what we're going to do today. So today we're going to talk. Okay, so I am so excited. I am so excited about this discussion. And so there's a lot that I'm going to try and wrap into it. And I'm going to begin with the concept of art, right? So this is supposed to be a discussion on dance, right? So we're trying to understand why it is that dance plays such a prominent role in sort of in the identity of men at arms in the medieval period, and the identity of sort of the courtly elite, right? The aristocratic elite of the medieval and Renaissance period. They were very concerned about dance. I've talked at length in some of the other discussions about the 7 probates, right? So this is this list of 7 things that comes up over and over and over again, and virtually every iteration. We've got references to fencing, wrestling, jumping, or leaping, and stone throwing as one of the 7. And in my previous 2 lectures with CKDF, we spent a long time talking about those things. But invariably, one of the other 7 on that list is dancing, right? So I'll just go through sort of the ones that I can recall off the top of my head. So we're talking like shooting, and by shooting I mean crossbows, bow and arrow, that kind of thing, and mounting and dismounting of horses, scaling walls, swimming, running, jumping. Those are the types of activities. And then at the end of the list, you typically have something like tournamenting, right? And what tournamenting means is this whole big discussion, and really there's no better way to understand it but to read like half a dozen books that discuss tournamenting through the period of through the medieval period up until the Renaissance, the beginning of the Renaissance period. It means lots of different things. Sometimes people died in tournaments. So like and then other times it was really, really important that everyone remained safe and sort of followed very strictly to the sporting rules. So there's a wide disparity when it comes to what it means to be tournamenting. But then also this idea of that you should dance, that you should know how to dance, that you should be engaged with dance. And my question from the very beginning, after I sort of was satisfied with the leaping question, because that was actually my question from the very beginning, was what is this leaping? Why is the leaping so important? And we've talked more about that than we need to. But then the other question is like, why dancing, right? So we have this question of dancing, right? And so what I'm going to begin today's discussion with is a question of art. Okay, so I'm also a musician. That's actually my primary job is being a musician. Jesse, who's kind enough to attend, he's been a martial arts quote unquote student of mine, but he's also been a musical colleague of mine for some 3-4 years. We've worked very closely together, and Jesse's a phenomenal musician and a music teacher, a professional music teacher, and brilliant in all sorts of ways. But so I may be bouncing ideas off Jesse throughout this, right? But so I'm a musician, I'm an artist. What does it mean to be an artist? In the 21st century, and I'll extend this to the 20th century, we have a particular idea of what it means to be an artist, right? And I'm going to open the floor to you guys, not to try and give me a sort of well-rounded and correct answer as to what it means to be an artist or to have art or to do things with art. I just want you to tell me, anyone who's brave enough to answer, what you would expect someone means if they said they were into art, right? So if you're met someone at a bar and hi, I'm James, I'm whoever, I'm Steve or Bob or Jerry, right? Oh, nice to meet you. What do you do? I'm, I work at a thing, but I'm into art. Like they say, I like art or I do art. Like, what do you think they mean, right? So if you hear someone say that, I'm into art or I do art, I like art, what do you think they're talking about? So go ahead and answer. The floor is open. Yeah, go ahead, Kirk.
When I think about artists, I'm just going to use my wife, for example. I'm not really one that's terribly artsy, so I'm going to use the example that she gives me. The way she describes art is a way of expressing an emotion or like an idea. And then when someone says that they like art or they like studying art, they like doing art, it's like a way of communicating without actually talking verbally. So a way of expressing, again, emotions, identity, ideals in a way that's a nonverbal communication.
Love it. I would say probably includes verbal communication too.
But I was gonna say, yeah, but think about that. Yeah, but she's a graphic designer, so I think she's speaking in that context. As now I think about it, yeah, literature exists. And that's
sure, good. Okay, great. Anyone else? Good answer, perfect answer. Anyone else?
Jesse said they assume visual art, and Ariane agreed.
Yeah, I'm gonna also agree that, and I guess things are happening in the chat. Let me see if I can. There we go. Now I have access to the chat. Jesse assumes visual art, right? That's like the most common response to that question that I get. Like bar none, 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, I'm expecting that someone's gonna say visual art, and then eventually they'll like qualify, right? So they begin with visual art. The way I heard John Charles describe it one time was like that it kind of begins with painting, right? And painting and or like drawing, and then radiates outward from there. So like we begin with painting, and then like we like qualify to include sculpture and various things like that. And then we say like, and then beyond that, we have the performing arts, which are distinct, right? So we say art, there's art, and then there's the performing arts. And the performing arts include what? Canonically, song and dance, or excuse me, music and dance and acting, right? And what we think about is, we think about, I think Kirk actually really hit the nail on the head, right? Because what Kirk described had to do with emotion, right? So conjuring up, and I would say that it may even be, so like definitely emotion is definitely a feature of the things that it's meant to conjure, that art as such is meant to conjure emotion, but it doesn't necessarily have to be emotion, but some kind of, it's expressing, very often it's expressing a metaphor for an idea, right? Or some kind of ideal, some kind of concept that kind of exists in an abstract way that we're trying to convey through whatever medium that we choose. And that's what people regard as art, right? Now, everyone here studies some type of fencing. Everyone except Jessie. Well, no, Jessie studies fencing regularly enough to be included in this, right? Everyone here studies fencing, and we all study quote unquote German fencing or Kunst des Fechtens. And who can tell me what the translation for Kunst des Fechtens is? Anybody?
The art of fighting.
The art of fighting. The art of fighting. Okay. There's other forms, there's other schools of historical fencing. What are the most common other schools of historical fencing? Someone other than Marlene, please interject with what you can think of off the top of your head. Destreza, Kara mentioned Destreza. What is Destreza, Kara?
It technically has a much longer name than that, but it's not the art that I study, so I don't remember the entire name in Spanish, but it's a Spanish school of the true art of fighting that has a number of characters.
There we go. So it's not the art that you study, so we'll use the term in our vernacular, but then also the translation for Destreza is, in fact, art. What about another one? Not Kara, someone else. What's the other most common, we'll say just the most common longsword system outside of Lichtenauer?
Meyer?
Fiore or Meyer?
I would say, I was going with Fiore, but I guess it's the answer is ambiguous enough to.
There's like most of the people out here in California, it's really hard to find a Fiorist here in California. Most everybody out here practices Meyer.
Right. We have Ted to thank for that. Thank God for Ted. But so Fiore, Fiore. All right. So what is Fiore's art called? Art. I'm just using the term art as though that's the proper term.
Flower of Battle?
Well, that's, yeah. So it's the Flower of Battle is the name of his book, but the broader term that Fiorists use to describe their art is, anyone? I'll tell you. It's armitsare. Right, armitsare is the, has everyone heard that term, or anyone heard that term being thrown around, armitsare?
I have, but I've heard it not necessarily in the Fiorist context, but I remember somebody telling me about I'm going to butcher the pronunciation here, arte de amritzar.
Okay, there, yeah, interesting, yeah. So so armitsare, right? So again, arte de amritzar. We have this term art used to describe the fencing system, right? I think Meyer's really great because Meyer writes to his reader. Well, so he wrote a manual. Meyer wrote a manual, right? This is in contrast to the earlier Lichtenauer authors who are writing manuscripts, probably for personal use, right? So Meyer is writing a manual to be published on a printing press and distributed throughout and given to people, some people who maybe have no understanding or no background in historical fencing, or historical fencing at the time, who have no background. And so he spends a lot of his time talking to the reader, right? And he talks a lot about art, and we use this term art. So now I'm gonna offer you this in a historical context. So keeping everything that we just talked about in mind, in a historical context, how would you distinguish the art that we talk about from the art that they were talking about? Does anyone have an answer for that?
It would probably be what we're talking about is what might be described in the past as the fine arts, whereas what they're talking about is more like craftsmanship, often in the sense of guilds, of mastery of a craft.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. So you're right about that. You're absolutely right that those are all the words that I want to hear. Right. When I say like what is it? Why do these historical fencing authors consistently make reference to this idea of art and also craft and also mastery? And when we regard these masters, we regard them as masters. And how is that different from what we think about? And so that's right. So here's what I'm going to offer you. Everyone here, you're welcome to do this. Go onto Google right now and just look up the definition of art. Just Google the definition of art. And that's where we're going to begin this in earnest.
The expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form such as painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power.
Perfect. So when I hear the word typically, and when I hear the word primarily, what immediately registers to me is not essential to what art is, right? If I see the word typically or primarily, what that really means is this is not important. The actual definition is what was above. And so why don't you go ahead and read the above definition again, Marlene, and then we'll talk about that a little bit. So
wait, you want the full thing, the expression or application?
The expression or application, but leave out the rest of it. So just stop about halfway through.
Got it. The expression or application of human creative skill and imagination.
Stop right there. Beautiful. Oh my God, right? So human creative expression and imagination are the operative words in that definition, right? That what art is it seems to me to be the ability to apply your knowledge, your craft, your mastery of a particular skill in a creative and imaginative way, right? And I think that's a really, really useful definition of art. And I'm actually quite sad that we as 21st century people don't really live in that world where we regard art that way. Jesse, you have a thought?
Yeah, I wonder if there's some kind of idea, when we attach the word art to like art of fighting, we also attach the word art to painting, that maybe art has a connotation that's something like a level of achievement or refinement, or conceptual rigor that goes above the minimally functional.
Well, so I would definitely agree that or maybe that there's an assumption or an implication that with art there is at least some kind of competency or even mastery, right, of a particular craft or field or skill, right? There, that in order to have art, that there is an implication of mastery. So often when I talk about this, I'm talking about it with music students, right? Because I teach music as part of what I do, and very often I will teach a musician to do a thing a certain way, right? So this is what I want you to do, right? And I have to walk a tightrope when I do that, because what I'm trying to do in those cases, I'm trying to teach my student how to be artful, right? But sort of when you think about the definition that I just offered you, right, which is this idea that that when we talk about art, that when we say this is your art, there is sort of it's part of the package that there's a creative skill or application of creativity and imagination in what you're doing, and so if I tell my music student, this is the way I want you to play this, so that you can be artful, right? That's wrong. That is wrong, right? That's a contradiction in terms, right? What they can do is they can learn an approach to be artful, right? And my goal for them is that they do learn this approach to be artful, and then take that approach as instructive in the future, and then apply their own art to the subject, right? And so, maybe you play it exactly the way that I said to play it, and you do that as a choice, right? And now all of a sudden it's artful. Or maybe you play it some other way different, and that's artful. And then the degree of the artfulness, is basically, it's a sort of amalgamation of your skill, right? Your skill in the particular field, your taste, right? So like, especially when we're talking about the fine and performing arts, where those are social, those are sort of social and emotive, like you are connecting people through them. And so your ability to connect socially, right, is part of that, right? But if we think about art as something different, so art, so my father was a builder. That was his job, right? So he was a mason, and he did and he applied his art, right? And he applied it every day, because what would happen is someone would say, hey, I want to build this chimney. And he had to look at the house and say, okay, how am I going to build a chimney on this house? There are no plans, right? So I think part of the reason that we've lost the meaning of art as sort of, the commonplace meaning of art that I'm describing here, and exchanged it for something that has invariably to do with emotion and visual communication, or oral communication of ideas. I think that it's because we live in a modern era, right? We live in an era of science. We live in an era of standard operating procedures and Wikipedia. And if we want to know how to do something, then we don't defer to our masters, right? Who are able to tell us by virtue of their mastery of a craft and skills and abilities, but rather we defer to what science has told us, or what the rules have told, what some other, does that make sense? Okay, so so Charles, you have a comment or thought?
Yeah. So this, the advice you give to your students parallels what happens a lot in social dance circles. So I've been doing this for like a decade, so I've kind of just, gone through phases, but inevitably, my view is that every time there's a song and we're dancing with someone, there's a 3-minute piece of art that we're both making, right, as we dance to the music. And it's very hard to break new people into that mindset, because art is seen as a profession, and it is done by professionals. And one thing that I found that social dance does is it tends to indoctrinate people in towards that a view of amateur expression, amateur art, right? That I don't need to be trained to express something, right? And it's just my general view, like 90% of art sucks, but we have to make it anyways. Like you have to do it. You have to do it, and you have to like spend the time to watch other people fail, like try and fail. But at least I just wanted to observe, like within social dance, the norm is a modern one. The beginning norm is a modern one, where like the oh no, I don't do art, the professional dancers do art, right?
Yeah, I love that. Charles, I love that so much, and it is so unbelievably relevant to what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because when I say the reason that we've lost this worldview that includes art as sort of a basis for mastery and for sort of interacting and engaging with the real world phenomena, right? is because we live in an era where no one wants to fail, right? No one wants to try and fail. I'm just going to go online and have my computer tell me how to do this, right? And that I'm not so like I'm really glad that I have a smartphone and a laptop, and like I'm not saying that we need to jettison this, you know, this new modern perspective where we're not doing things as sort of artful masters, but rather like building off of the body of work, right? And also like there's an artful way to do that too, right? But I think the bottom line is that part of this idea of mastery and art, and that art as an expression of your mastery, is that it's possible to fail, because it's essential to what art is, as I'm putting it forward, right? It's essential to that you're using your imagination and your own personal creativity, right? To apply the knowledge and the skills that you've developed a mastery, the craft that you've developed a mastery for over the course of however long, right? Or maybe not a mastery, you know, you have to go through a process of, you have to go through a journeyman process, an apprentice process, before you can obtain a level of mastery. And that is going to include a lot of failing. And I think our mindset is, instead of going through the process to learn how to fail or to become better through failure, that our, you know, what we'd rather do is use the resources, the multitude of awesome resources that we have to protect ourselves from that failure. And that may, and I'm just suggesting that may have some contribution to the shift in the mindset with regards to art. Marlene, go ahead.
So I see what you're saying with the multitude of failure that needs to happen. And we see this often in like just classical dance, like a normal dance class, right? Like you always have those combinations that are too hard, or those techniques that you haven't mastered quite yet. But even now, with this reliance on technology, it's a different type, like I would argue it's a different type of journey to find that mastery and that artistry within yourself. And oftentimes it requires, yes, a certain amount of failure, but to an extent, a certain amount of imitation before you find your own artistry within the artistry of others. So like if you watch a 3 or a 4-year-old and they just saw the advanced class do something, right? They immediately start mimicking and doing their own interpretation of what those movements should be. They're failing miserably, but they're using their imagination and forming those synaptic connections and those thought pathways to eventually be able to have their own voice in this art, creating their own artistry with their own bodies and contributions. And if we end up using technology to do that, then so be it.
Yeah, no, and that was, I tried to hint at that when I was saying, like, you know, it in the modern meta, it's not like, you know, we can still approach that journey with some form of artfulness, right? So like there's an artful way for me to learn how to get better at something using the computer, right? So like I can either go on YouTube and just click on whatever video that the first thing that comes up when I type it into the search box, or I can do like a little bit of research first, right? I can, and that's sort of that, and that's the artfulness, that's the creativity and imagination, the development of skills that leads me to, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, I totally agree that it's not lost. I think all I'm trying to do here is just point out that there does seem to have been a shift in the way that we view what we do. Whereas art used to be, the way that we used to regard all of the trades, all of our skills as sort of an expression of our art. And we see that in the historical combat sources specifically. And then today, the way that 99.9% of us, right, Americans would regard art as being sort of connected to emotion, right? Conveyed through a visual media, and then we sort of radiate outward from that. So I just think that's interesting. And it is connected to dance, because when we think of dance, we think of the art of dance, where it's probably very easy for us to get caught up in that distinction, thinking of dance as necessarily connected to the way that we conceive of dance as a part of the larger category of art that we have in our minds today. All right. So now let's talk about dance. So dance is really interesting to me. I've already kind of so the way that I want to begin this is I want to think about dance as not necessarily being connected to sort of an expression of emotion. I want to think about a function of dance. First of all, I want to think about what are some of the benefits of dance, and I'm going to defer to the dancers here, and then I want to take this conversation in a particular direction. But I want to give people an opportunity to express why they think why might a historical man-at-arms, right? Someone who was concerned with being a career man-at-arms, career martial artist in the 14th and 15th century and 16th century, why might they feel like in order to be a well-rounded martial artist, they would include dance in their sort of development? And so I'll defer to the dancers, but also anyone else who has an answer, go ahead, please. The floor is open.
Charles, you want to go first?
Sure. All right. I'm just going to start with my thinking just from a social partner dance perspective. You know, the obvious ones: rhythm, physical movement, vocabulary, blah, blah, blah. I think also sensitivity and a way to think of physical movement that is non-martial. So like not every movement needs to be destructive or hard. It can be sensitive. It can be also expressive, right? And also learning to read the movements of other people. So when you dance, you look at yourself, you look at others, you really just train your eye. You train your eye to read what people are thinking in that moment. And when you dance, you also learn to either express or hide, right? You can be sad but appear happy, happy appear sad. All of those things get wrapped up into dance. So it is really about being able to use your body as a canvas.
So keep talking. I have to grab a pen. I didn't bring one with me, but just
okay.
Or Marlene, if you want to go. That was really, really brilliant, Charles. Thank you.
So kind of along the same lines as Charles, it does create a certain amount of body awareness that one does not have the same ability to develop in a martial scenario. Like there's one thing to be training martially and like learning to throw a person to the mat or throw a person to a hay bale or jump into a saddle or swing a sword in like the most graceful, destructive way without like accidentally clipping yourself. The type of, so mine was, okay. So ballet was very solo. I did minimal partner work just because boys are hard to come by in ballet. But in Irish step dancing, there's solo work, but there's also Kayleys, which are the social types of dances. So I guess from a solo standpoint, what you would learn is just this connection that you have with your body. And I love Cicchetti so much. Like I would even argue Vaganova is just as good, the Russian style. It follows similarly, where you have to pay attention to exactly where everything is in order to develop your muscles in the appropriate way so you develop the correct physique, which sounds really snobby, I guess, because all dancers want to be skinny and like perfect or whatever. But I'm 5 foot, Italian, curvy, whatever. But it was so neat to watch my body change while I was doing this. Like you have the ability to say, I'm not tightening my quad in the appropriate way. I'm activating the major and I need to activate the minor. I need to get this little thing involved. And I am sinking in my arches, which is causing me to lose my balance here, 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 and here. And if I am like, it just, you have this fluency with your body that allows you to then take that fluency and apply it to the martial aspect. So if I'm having an off sword day, I can be like, what is going on? Like you just have this moment where you can center and say, it's because I'm not gripping it correctly, or my timing is slightly off. I've done this one little thing and it's thrown everything off. But because you have had that chance to study and work with yourself in such a, it's not even high stress, in such a detailed, focused way, you can expand and apply that elsewhere. In a broad sense, you have the agility, the flexibility. The flexibility is good because it reduces injury frequency, unless you're hyper flexible, in which case you have to worry about reduced sensation from the hyper flexibility, which I didn't know was a thing until I started wrestling. So that's a thing. But even from a social aspect, like the Kayleys themselves, it was a way for you to just ground yourself and like have fun with the people around you. And socially, it was the way that you would like flirt with your person. It was like, because in Kayleys, it's very right angled and the arms touch here and like, that's it. This is it. Like maybe you get to go up underneath of them here and like maybe you get to figure eight with them. But this is the only contact you had. And then it was like, you just make eyes at each other, I guess. And that's how you had your whole entire conversation. So you have that social aspect that kind of brings you back to yourself and back to your community.
Great. Go ahead, Liz.
Speaking as a just about lifelong klutz, after I'd been doing this for a few years, I went back and was just sort of playing around with my nephew dancing, but all I was doing were steps from sword. And my parents asked me, when did you learn to dance? I said, no, it's just doing that in time. It's the same steps. It's the same thing. It's a way of reinforcing it in a way that makes it mental memory, so that it just becomes instant and you can just do it while you're swinging a sword, while you're doing whatever else. Your feet are doing what they've trained to do.
Yeah. Okay, something that you said that is going to be our jumping off point, Liz, was it's just doing that in time. Okay, that's my favorite thing anyone said today. Actually, all day. I've had a long day. I've been out with lots of people. And that is my favorite thing that anyone said this entire time. It's just doing that in time. So let's talk about what dance and music. Okay, so I think Matthew McCaffrey just wants to add something about time in regards to dance, fighting and dance specifically. Matthew, I'm gonna put you on hold for just 1 second because I may actually get to it here. So I don't know where you want to go, but this is definitely where I want to go. And then we'll come back. We'll circle back just to make sure that we covered everything that you had to add there. So it's just doing that in time. So here's what I'm going to offer you. That when people think about dance, very often what they think about is the movement, the mobility, and the rhythm part. What I'm going to suggest to you is that there's a sort of grander sense of what we're trying to achieve with dance. And then that's going to extend to various other ways that we engage with the physical world, right? And specifically, that's going to have to do with time, right? So with dance, what we're trying to do is we're trying to coordinate our actions across time, right? So with dance, we're specifically concerned with how it is that we engage, with that we coordinate all of our behaviors, with our movements or whatever, in a given scope of time. So it's sort of it's essential to this understanding of dance that there's a temporal continuum that we're concerned with, and that we're taking things that happen and we're putting them in places along this temporal continuum. Okay, and we're going to get to sort of what it means to be rhythmic or to have rhythm. We're going to get into what a beat is and why we're going to be interested about what a beat is and what an end is and how that relates to martial arts. The other thing the other thing that I loved hearing was what Marlene, both Marlene and Charles brought up, which is this idea of sort of a sensitivity or sort of a connection. Marlene, you were talking about the solo was sort of like the connection that you have to, I'm going to paraphrase. So you were talking about kind of the connection that you have to the music, right? Which is, I think, essentially what you were talking about. And sort of,
I actually wasn't even talking about the music. Like the music is where I would, like personally me, the music was where I would work on my artistry. But if I was working on my body, I focused on like just the bare minimum of the music so I could just stay on time.
okay. Okay. So I'm talking about sort of like, maybe what I'm really talking about is a connection or a synchronicity that you've got.
Okay.
Right. Because really what you're concerned with is your ability to get into, and what we call, in the music world, we call it being in the pocket. Right. So there's this idea of being in the pocket, which is a really, really powerful idea. And it's sort of hard to articulate to kind of non-musicians or non-dancers. But when you're sort of engaged with this project of coordinating your actions as divided sort of rhythmically in bars across some sort of continuum of some sort of temporal continuum, that the timing of all of your actions have to fit very neatly into the pocket. And what Charles was talking about is so being in the pocket with your partner. So like when you have a partner, you have to have a sensitivity to them, right? It's not just a sensitivity that you have and the ability and a synchronicity that you have with the music and the way that the music is moving across time, but also a sensitivity and a synchronicity with your partner and the way that they're moving across time. Because the way that we think about moving across time is rhythmically, right? So what I'm going to offer you is that we can think of dance as sort of art and expression and beauty and connectivity and emotion and all that stuff. Or we could think about like art and rhythm as sort of a follow-on from that. Or we could think about like rhythm as a way that we sort of make the process manageable, right? Make this idea of trying to coordinate my behavior over an extended period of time in such a way that it makes it manageable. Okay, sorry, John. Sorry. So Charles, I keep wanting to call you John Charles because John Charles is also here. So I apologize to both of you for that. And also, Charles, you have your hand raised.
Okay, yeah. Just to add a little bit to that. So whenever I dance, go to like events now, I always compete, and I compete in this event called a Jack and Jill dance. The basic idea is you're paired with someone generally you have never seen before, and you are asked to dance in front of a lot of people like for a 3-minute song. So, and in essence, like, nominally you are competing, right? Like it's a competition, someone wins, right? But I think you are being asked to make a piece of art with someone you don't know, and you need to figure out on the fly, all right, who are you? Where are you from? What's your deal? What can I use with you, right? How can we make this artful together within 3 minutes on beat the entire time? It's different from more rehearsed dances because generally I'm dancing with someone like I've never seen before. As we're walking out to the floor, I'm literally introducing myself. I'm like, my name is Charles. Who the hell are you? I'm more polite than that, but and that is really kind of that state of mind, like right there is actually, I consider, very close to the fencing mind, where
oh my God, yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I could absolutely not agree more that you have to know there are a lot of questions of art in that scenario, right? So it's not only to what degree can I get into the pocket with this person?
Yes.
Right. But it's also like, what techniques do they know? What's a reasonable way for me to approach this? Should I go right in? Should I go right into where I like send them out and bring them back in and dip them, or should we do like a little like thing with our hands first and kind of go in and out, or should we just do like a little jitterbug step, to kind of get our rhythm or whatever, right? And you're like, you as a master of your art, you're seeing this but way before it unfolds, right? You're like, based on the gait of the person walking out to the floor, what you can potentially get away with, at least initially. And
I'm
then
totally judgy. I look at their clothes. I look at their shoes.
That's really.
I mean,
fun.
not in a negative way, but just like, all right, how aggressive should I start for like the first 4/8? You know,
That's not a. I mean, I don't think that's judgy. I think that, I mean, in as much as that, like, this whole question is that of judgment. That's part of what it means to be artful, right? I'm going to keep on coming back to this. That's why I literally spent 40 minutes talking about that, because it's part of what it means to be artful, to make decisions, right? The decisions have to be an application of your creativity and imagination, and your aptitude and your skill, right?
I would argue your confidence too.
Oh my goodness, yeah, without question, right? Yeah, you gotta, you have to be, especially in this scenario, right, where you're trying to carefully coordinate things across time. It's not like a puzzle, right? This is like really important. It's not like a puzzle. You don't get a piece and say, this top is blue and this is green. Maybe I can, no, it's not going to go there. You get one shot.
Yeah.
Right? You get one shot because that moment along the continuum only comes once. Right? Okay, Jesse, you have your hand raised.
Yeah. So as a musician, thinking about dancers, like when I watch dancers, what I'm thinking about from dancers, or what I feel like I learned from dancers, is when I'm teaching students about rhythm in all kinds of contexts, the first thing that I talk about is walking. And I think if you live in a body in an environment of gravity, everything you do is rhythmic, and it's success or failure, it's all rhythmic, and you're either the victim of rhythm, you're the victim of gravity, or you're the master of it. So, if you slip on the ice and you fall on your ass, something rhythmic just happens. Or if you handle that moment gracefully and you roll or whatever. So when you walk, we all walk with like a 98, 99 point something % accuracy. And so we have this experience of that being in the pocket. And when, as musicians, we are trying to portray that. We're trying to portray that feeling of mastery of gravity, essentially. But what I see when I see dancers, a singer can just go for however long they can, however long their lung capacity allows them to, but a dancer can't hang in the air forever. Dancers, a dancer has no choice but to be rhythmic, every second, or more frequently than every second. A musician absolutely has the choice to execute for rhythm. We're trying to portray rhythm. We're trying to paint a picture of rhythm or paint a picture of time. But dancers don't have a choice about that. They are painting a picture of time, and they're either doing it well or not.
Right. Excellent. Yeah, that was really great. So we are probably going to come back to gravity. Gravity is a big part of what it means to be. In my mind, I can't conceive of being rhythmic without conceiving of gravity. And so we will come back to that. But let's take a small sort of detour, or kind of figure that was a detour. We're coming off it now. So I'm just gonna, or here I will say tangentially, one part of this that we didn't really talk about, but some of the commentators brought up, was what I'm gonna call learning in sequences, right? So that's really important. Dancers have this ability, and when I say dancers, I mean dancers, formerly dancers who are now fencers, seem to have an ability where they can break down movement patterns and actions to smaller sort of groups of actions and learn to sequence them in the correct order in a way that you can really only get by training dance, like, training dance very carefully, right? Sort of this sort of atemporal approach to the behaviors. I teach my music students, I tell them there are 2 ways you can practice this for perfection, right? So I say, I want you to practice this line of music for perfection. By that, I mean, I don't want you to mess up at all. And there are 2 ways that you can do this. The first way is you can do it arrhythmically, right? Arrhythmically is the easiest way to practice for perfection because you don't have to concern yourself with the temporal continuum component, right? You can just say, okay, I play an A here and the next note is gonna be a B, and I can wait and think, okay, next note is gonna be a B. What is a B? Let me look at it here. Okay, describe it as a dialogue. Yes, yeah. Francisco Lota was right, and we're gonna come back. That's actually gonna be, hopefully that's gonna be how we wrap this discussion up, John. So, okay, so yeah, this ability to sort of compartmentalize movement patterns and sequences of movement patterns so that we can train our body to be fluid in the motion, so that eventually we can begin to coordinate that over and across time. So like we learn the basic steps, the sequence of the movement, and then we do that a number of times till we have command over it. And then we put it in a rhythm, right? So then we put it in whatever rhythm that we're concerned with, right? So the rhythm for music is going to be determined by the rhythm of the piece, right? Or the rhythm for dance is going to be determined by the rhythm of the dance or the rhythm of the music. The rhythm for fencing is going to be determined by something different, and that's sort of getting into this idea of being in the pocket. And we're going to get to there later, but Francesco is right that there is a dialogue happening, because to be in the pocket with someone is not just there is this ethereal thing and then both of you are down here and you're approaching the pocket, right? That's not how being in the pocket with someone works. What you actually have is there are 2 people or more, and they're constantly connecting with each other, and they're creating the pocket, and the pocket exists, sort of, and encompasses them, right? It's not this thing that they're, and like, and this is important too. It's not this thing where it's up here and then this person is approaching it and then this person just can't seem to get there, right? That's not how it works, right? Now, when you have more people, maybe we can make arguments about like, hey, you're the one who's dropping the ball here. But if we're thinking about in fencing, where the contrived environment is 2 people, right? I think it's useful to think about it that way. So now, okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about historical dance, because let's be real, right? We all like historical things. That's why we chose this and not whatever else you could be doing. And so we're going to talk about historical, medieval, and Renaissance dance. So first we're going to say medieval dance. The reason that we're going to bring up medieval dance is because the first references that we have to dance as a part of this martial continuum is in 1408, we think, right? Circa 1408, and that's der Ritterspiegel, which has the 7 probates enumerated, and dance is one of them, all right? And so we don't have any sense of what dancing looked like. Like, we don't have any, we have very, very, very little information. We don't have any accounts or specifically delineated accounts of what a dance looked like, what the music was for these dances until 1451, right? So up until that point, we have the names of some of these dances. We have the types of dances, and we have some music. Now, I find it unfortunate, but the music that we have, is medieval, is written in a medieval way, which is to say that it's not concerned with rhythm as much as the music that we have today, right? They give you a sort of melodic line, or sometimes they give you like a figure bass line, and maybe a set of harmonic progressions that happen over the figure bass line. And this is, I'm talking, Jessie, just for your knowledge, I'm talking like pre-Bach even, right? So like we're talking almost into the Gregorian type of written music. And so that kind of music, it doesn't tell us what we need to know as people who are concerned with medieval dance, right? So what we do know is we have some of this music, and we've seen some attempts to reconstruct it. I'm going to go ahead and pull up some examples of this, right? So just let me know if you guys can hear this. So the first, one of the first types of dance that we're looking at is going to be the estampi, or estampie, or I don't know, I'm not really sure what it is, but here is an example of an attempt to recreate one of the royal estampis. There are 8 of these royal estampis. This is royal estampi number 3. Let me know if you can't hear, or if you can hear this. Okay. Okay, so what do we have here? There's some elements of that I'm gonna talk a little bit about, and then maybe you guys can share if you heard anything else that was going on. I guess we'll just give you a chance to get your thought out, Jessie, before I begin.
Just gonna say, in agreement with how you were describing things, it's also, or in addition, it's also the case that music people would have been dancing to is not, the vast majority of music you'd see notated in like the 13th century is not the music people would be dancing to. And so like what you just heard, the musicians that make that are looking at other models. They're looking at models of modern traditional music that relates to where, so they might have the melody for a tune like that written out, and then they look at Arab sources or possibly Irish sources. They look at modern recorded versions of traditional music that might help them understand how rhythm would have worked.
Right. So specifically, I think in this case, and I'm making a leap here. I don't know. I haven't talked to the musicians who rendered this piece, but I believe that what they were drawing from was more sort of Renaissance accounts of similar types of dances. So we know that these types of dances are connected. We know that this, for instance, the estampis may or may not be connected to the bassa dance, and we do have some stuff from the 14th. Like I said, the first really well-documented dances are going to be from Italian dance masters in the 1450s, who give us sort of a rhythmic idiom to follow, right? So, for instance, there was a rhythmic idiom with that piece. I agree with you, Ariane. That slapped. So the rhythmic
by that
idiom,
time, by 1450, they had rhythmic notation. So
right, exactly. So they could kind of repurpose some of that. Backwards. They're informing it. We can't know that it would be correct, but so the rhythmic idiom that we just listened to was a waltz rhythm, right? So, and by waltz rhythm, we're going to say, anything that kind of goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then if we subdivide it, it's going to be 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. So that's really important. There's a lot of stuff that I just dumped on you right there, right? I just said that we have a rhythmic idiom, and it's got a beat. I just gave you a beat, and I just told you how many beats it was divided into, and I just gave you what the subdivisions of those beats were, and I'm expecting you guys to take all of the relevant information from that, and that's a lot to ask. So let's unpack it just a hair, right? I'm going to give you some definitions here for those of you who are not musicians. And you may wonder why you're in music class, but then just remind yourself that you signed up to be here. And so the definitions I give you are not going to be the definitions you'll get out of a book. Some some professional musicians might give you the same answers that I'm going to give you. Some might give you different ones, but doesn't matter to me for my purposes here. So a beat, the way that we're going to think about a beat is when you tap your foot. Okay, so when you're listening to a piece of music, there's a beat, presumably, right? We have a beat. Thanks, Jessie. Appreciate it. So Jessie's taking off. But so what a beat is, right, is when you tap your foot. So if we think about that piece of music, we have a dum digga dum dum ding dum digga dum da dee do 1 and 2 3 1 2 3, and we're going to say that within that beat, there are subdivisions, meaning there are different sort of rhythmic pulses that happen inside of the beat, inside of me clapping my hand like this, right? 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and there can be different subdivisions depending on the groove, depending on the musicians. Those subdivisions can be sort of divided in different ways. And so, for instance, it might be 1 2 3 1 and 2 and 3 and, or I might say something like 1 2 3, maintaining the beat, the exact same beat, but dividing the subdivisions a little differently. Instead of 1 and 2 and 3 and, what I have is 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3. Does everyone see how the beat did not change? That if we just looked at the clapping of my hands, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and, my hands were doing the exact same thing throughout 2 bars of music, right? But then there was a subdivision that was happening, and and that subdivision had different values, right? So there was the and in that case might have been a longer count, taking more taking more of a space on that continuum across time, or taking less space on that continuum across time, right? And that's an example of what it means to be in the pocket. So if we look at music as it's written on paper today, we're not given the amount of space between the subdivisions, right? Music on paper today, they will get us as far as 1 and 2 and 3 and, right? But that's as far as it goes. They won't tell us that the and is going to take this much space, or it's going to take this much space, right? Now, if we think about that, the and is a part of the larger beat, right? So we have the beat extends from 1 to 2. This is the amount of space that we're covering on our continuum. And then we have somewhere along this space, that's where the and goes. And that's going to be different for every musician. And definitely, like, you know, you can capture it by recording, but also in the medieval period, we don't have that, right? So we don't have any recording. So you can imagine that there's going to be a difference in every instance of, or every iteration of a performance of that piece. Okay, so that would be a rendering of a medieval piece. Again, it was informed by Renaissance pieces where the rhythmic notation had been introduced and was being used. I also want to talk a little bit about sort of how the dancers would approach that and who would be doing the dancers. So up until the 1450s, we have very few really well documented sources about what kind of dances. We have a lot of iconography, and so we can see sort of some of the movement patterns that the dancers would be doing. But much like historical fencing, it's a snapshot in time, right? So when you're looking at dance iconography, just as when you're looking at fencing iconography, you can't capture the sense of the way that the movement pattern happens across time, the timing of each of the actions, right? And then also, like, you can't get a sense of what all else they were doing, right? It's just, you know, one movement, they might be lifting their arms. The next thing that happens might be they put their arms down. Well, we can't know that, right? All we can know is that at some point during this dance, you know, it was reasonable that someone would have their arms like this. We can't even say that they did, right? Because then we have to contend with the artist rendering and the creativity that we're affording them, right? But what we can say for sure is, like, it was reasonable that someone in the period would have had their hands up like this. But we can't that doesn't tell us anything about the timing of the action. And it doesn't tell us anything about the way that they perform the action across time, right? And it doesn't tell us anything about the rhythmic idiom that they're concerning themselves with. Now, let's talk a little bit about that subdivision again, right? So we've got 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. We can swing that a little bit, right? So I know John Charles, or excuse me, fucking did it again. Sorry, John Charles. Sorry, Charles. I know Charles is thinking, you know, as someone who's like concerned with vernacular, you know, African American dance in America in the early 20th century. Everything's got a lot of swing, yeah?
Yeah.
What does that sound like? Why don't you give us an expression of that rhythmic idiom? So I don't know if you guys are hearing that, but we've got a 1 and 2, 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 1 and 2. Okay, that's cool. So we were using a waltz rhythm just a second ago, right? We were using a waltz rhythm where there was 3 beats in a bar, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 2 subdivisions per beat. So it was 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. I'm just going to break down Charles's. I'm going to break down the rhythmic idiom that he just gave to us real quick, so that you can see how I'm thinking about this music when I'm hearing it, right? So he's going. So he's got his beat 2 and 3 4 and 1, 2 and 3 4 and 1, 2 and 3 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and that's going to be the rhythmic idiom that Charles is expressing. We call that a halftime rhythm, right? So a halftime rhythm is going to be 4 subdivisions per beat, right? And we're going to give, so we give, you know, we're going to think of these subdivisions as happening in eighth notes, and they're 2 groups of 4 in a bar, right? So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and it's really more like 2 and 1, you know, or 2 and 3 4 and 1, 2 and 3 4, but however you want to conceive of it. And it's a little harder to hear exactly what Charles is doing without the music, because the emphasis is going to play a role in determining which numbers go where. All right. But even if we think about the difference between the 1 and the 2, the space between the 1 and the 2 is the same as the space between the 3 and the 4. It's going to be the difference between the space between the 2 and the 3. But it's the subdivision that I'm concerned with. Okay. The subdivision is really where the rubber meets the road when it comes to using rhythm and using dance as a way to learn to understand how things happen rhythmically and how we feel our opponent's actions, right? So let's think about this now. So Charles already hinted at it. When he's dancing and he has this rhythm going, and he's got to maintain himself in that rhythm. 2 and 3 4 and 1, 2 and 3, right? 2 and 3 4 and 1, 2 and 3 4 and 1, 2 and 3 4, right? So that's what's happening, and he has to put his actions into that rhythm, right? But more importantly, he has to put his actions into his partner's rhythm, right? Him and his partner need to be operating in that same groove. Now, if we have a drummer articulating all the eighth notes, it's a little easier, right? But if we don't have a drummer, or if we do have a drummer, but they're only articulating the beats, then we've got to create our own subdivisions, right? We have to create our own swing. We have to decide where the ands go, as opposed, like we know where the numbers go. The numbers go where the beat is, boom, where I'm tapping my foot. But we don't know where the ands go. And we're going to think about why it is that we're going to be concerning ourselves with the ands as historical fencers. Now, if we don't have the ands in the right place, even if we're nominally on the same beat, right? We're nominally working to the same beat, right? That's just the taps, the claps, the foot taps. If we don't have the ands, then we're not going to make art, right? If we're not sunk up, if we're, as in musician vernacular, what we're talking about is being in the pocket. If we're not sunk up, we're not going to be able to time our actions correctly. We're not going to meet each other at the same place in our own on our own temporal continuum. right? Does that resonate with you, Charles?
Yeah, definitely. There are a lot of times I'll be dancing, and if it's someone new, I mean, like always, the goal is for your partner to feel like they're having the best dance ever, regardless of like their skill level. But sometimes you'll be dancing with someone and they'll make a mistake, and you know they make a mistake, and sometimes they don't know it. So you're thinking, all right, well, I can either insist that my footwork is correct, or I can change it so that we're both in sync and they never realize they made a mistake. And then we can just continue from there, right? Because I'd rather be in sync with the person I'm dancing with than just like having to implicitly tell them that something is wrong.
Right, yeah. I mean, and sometimes it's your prerogative, but a lot of times that's not an option, you know what I mean? Like, so for instance, if you're dancing with an experienced partner, there might be a little bit of a battle, right? A little bit of an egotistical battle about whose rhythm that we're going to follow for our actions. And you might step on each other's toes a little bit, but
Oh
eventually,
yeah.
eventually you square it away, right? You get it all where it needs to be, right? But for a new person or someone that you can't tell that to, right?
Yeah.
Then you might have to acquiesce.
Yeah.
For the sake of working indes. All right, so now let's talk about indes, right? I love indes. So when I tell people what indes is, what I say is that it's this thing that you do inside your opponent's action, right? So your opponent performs a strengthening. Your opponent performs an act of strengthening, right? You're in a bind, you've attained strong geometry. Your next action is to thrust your opponent, and they push you aside, right? The canonical response to that is what? Anyone want to guess or no? No, Marlene, you can't answer anymore. Not yet. I'll give you permission later. Anyone else other than Charles and Marlene? What's the canonical response to this?
Snappen or Umschlag.
You could umschlag, you can schnappen, depends on the nature of their strengthening. You could oben abgenehmen or zocken, however you want to describe it. But these are all examples of canonical ways that you could respond to that act of strengthening on the part of your opponent, right? We all agree with that. I don't think anyone would disagree. But then there's this question of the timing of that, right? So like, it's all well and good to say, all right, I know that I'm supposed to umschlag here, or I'm supposed to oben abgenehmen. But how often does it happen that you oben abgenehmen and your opponent is able to parry that, right? So like, just, how often does it happen? I'll tell you, it happens to me, right? Like it's not unrealistic that you attempt to do an action, you attempt to perform an action, and it fails because your partner is working at what? Thanks, John Charles. Oh, he's gone. Your partner is working at what? Right? He's working at a different tempo. He's working with a different rhythm. You're not in the pocket. Right? Now, we don't tend to think about things as being in the pocket. We don't tend to think about these actions as being necessarily connected to this rhythmic idiom that happens across time. But I think the higher level fencers do, at least in some sense. Maybe not like a dance, the way that some of us who are very concerned with music do, but certainly in terms of the rhythmic sequence of an action. I'm gonna pick on Kirk again, right? So Kirk got into this from video games, right? So let me tell you, what's the story? Tell me about the timing of your actions in video games, particularly the timing of pressing buttons.
With the games that I play, a lot of times people equate them to rhythm, in that you see the visual input that the boss is giving you or an enemy doing. Like, say he's raising up to strike and you have to time when to dodge, block, or parry. So it's this idea. As you're describing how you felt that indes is very important, I feel like that also applies in video games, as you have to feel the rhythm that the boss is going or the enemy's going and move in lieu on that. So you have to understand the tempo this boss is moving and moving, like I said, in subsets to like hit him in between his moves and then go back on the defensive. So it's like a boom, and then your actions, boom, his actions, boom, your actions, and goes back.
Yeah, exactly. And if we just think about the fact that these actions happen across time, right? And that you can hit the right button, right? But it's never any more apparent than in video games, right? Because in video games, there's nothing else that you could blame it on. You can't blame it on he's stronger, bigger, faster than you. You can't blame it on that he's better fencer, that he know. You have to look at it and say, I did the right thing, I pressed the right button, but I just didn't do it at the right time, right? And I think that that will really open our eyes with regards to what it means to be acting indes, right? So acting indes, we need to have a tempo before we can act indes, right? Because we need to have a beginning and an end point of our opponent's actions. And then we need to think about how we're going to act within, and what rhythmic paradigm are we going to have in mind when we're acting within our opponent's actions, right? So how might we do that? Well, so let's talk about sort of the natural. So you know, in the kind of music that I play, I have a lot of freedom where I'm able to decide what type of swing. So swing is a word that is a technical word, right? So beat was what? Beat was when you tap your foot, right? Everyone remember that? So the beat is when you tap your foot. And now I'm going to say that the meter is basically going to tell you how many beats are in a bar, right? Now, we're not going to talk about what they told you in school about 4 beats in a measure and 4 chord note gets 1 beat. Leave that out of it, because none of that's right anyway. They lied to you. But what we are going to say is that if you look at the meter will tell you how many beats are in a bar, right? Which is important to us, because the bar is how we break it down into manageable chunks, how we break the action down into manageable chunks, right? We need to have one subsections that we can call the place that actions happen. Because if we don't, if we can't break it down into these different, you know, these different compartmentalizations of what's happening over time, then you have to think about all of the various things that happen in that continuum. And you have to take one thing and put it in all that mess, right? So we don't do that, because that would be too hard. No one can do that. So we say that there's 2 beats in a bar, or there are 4 beats in a bar, or there are 3, right? Whatever the case may be. And then we concern ourselves with the subdivision. The meter will also tell you how many subdivisions there are. So for instance, the music that we listened to, the estampe from the medieval period, that was a waltz rhythm. So it was 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. I can take those subdivisions and keep the subdivisions identical, but instead of changing the subdivisions, I'm going to change the beat. So the beat is when you tap your foot, right? So all of my 1 and 2 and 3 and they're all going to still be there in the same place they were. I'm just going to call them something different. I'm going to tap my foot differently. So I go from 1 and 2 and 3 and to 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and you see, everything was exactly the same. All I did was call it something different and tap my foot differently. And yes, like the jig, yes, Marlene. So we're going, you know, and so that's a different rhythmic idiom, right? So I've got my beats when I'm tapping my foot, when my actions are happening. And then I have the places that I put things that aren't on the beat. And that's the important thing, I think, about indes, right? The important thing about indes is that actions that happen indes are not happening on the beat, necessarily not happening on the beat. They're happening inside the beat. So they're essentially happening on the subdivision, right? They're happening on the and, right? So you can think about this when you're fencing with someone, right? So you know you have your swords extended and you're doing just a basic fencing drill, and we'll say that the drill is going to be a taker, right? So you've got a taker drill. The opponent strengthens, and inside that strengthening, you're going to either zucken or durchwechseln to take on the other side, right? So he goes boom, and very often the way that this manifests is you have strengthen, durchwechseln, strengthen, durchwechseln, strengthen, durchwechseln. Now, what is that if we're thinking about it in terms of the rhythmic framework that we've already adopted here? When would the actions be happening? Did someone just, I heard typing. Anyone
Yeah,
want to-
so Matthew asked, I remember being told that the trick to master strikes is that you need to be aware of both your and your opponent's tempo, and then purposefully move off tempo so your strike lands first. And then he's asking if that makes sense. Initially, it sounded like he was meaning to strike with in the and, like in that pause.
Yeah, no, I think that does make sense, Matthew. I'm a little hesitant to start getting into the question of sort of interpretation of the sources and that kind of thing. And as I open this discussion off with, I promise you, if you get me offline or get me online somewhere else, I will have that conversation with you for sure. I think within what I'm describing, yes, you are absolutely right. You are describing exactly the phenomena that I'm trying to offer you as a way to think about our actions, is that our actions are happening on a beat, right? And so in that drill that I suggested, right, you have a taker, durchwechseln, taker, durchwechseln, okay, right? And you strengthen, durchwechseln, strength. And my problem with that expression of that drill is that both of those actions are happening on the beat, right? And so what we should have is and one, and one, and one, and one. Do you see the difference? Right? So you're able to put your action inside of your opponent's action, as opposed to a back and forth passing of the beat, and both of you are just landing on top of the beat. You know, I feel like there is a natural rhythm, that there is a natural swing. People describe swing as where the ands are not, like, it's got swing if the ands aren't perfectly symmetrical, right? So meaning the and doesn't perfectly divide the beat, right? I'm going to suggest that there's no case in the world ever where the and perfectly divides the beat, except in MIDI format, right? So when computers generate the music, then you get that's when you get the ands perfectly dividing the beat. And anyone who's paid attention to music at all can immediately perceive that that's computer generated music, right? Can we all agree with that? Like, you listen to a MIDI, you're like, that's a MIDI. I don't need to know. No one played that. The computer played that. You put in the inputs and then it spit that out, because there's no human that would sound like that playing music. And what I'm going to offer.
It's really common in hip hop now for people to reminisce and like almost crave the beats from like the 80s and 90s when they were making them, when it was human invented on their mix machines, right? Now you have the ability to do everything on a computer, and the computer's like, do you want me to match that tempo? And you're like, yeah, totally, fix it.
Yeah, and it's pretty artificial. And even when they try and like account for it, and they give it like a bit of artificiality, you can still tell, like, you know what I mean? Like, they try to put that human element in there, but there's just no way that you can do. All right, cool. So, all right, John, you got a thing.
Yeah, thanks. So slightly off longsword, but still within the rubric of sword fighting. Something that we did when we first started with Polish Saber, and this is something that Jake would have us do, is we would initiate our training sessions with a rhythmic back and forth of, and it's a bit hard to describe, something that's easier to show, but one of you cuts down, the other one defends and hanging guard, and then you switch, but basically it's this constant back and forth, and the entire time you're also both rocking back and forth as you transition between cut, parry, cut, parry, cut, parry. And the point to that, all this rambling is that's stage one, where you develop a dialogue through the sword pay. And then stage two of that is now you start looking for moments to disrupt the person. So instead of doing the same cuts you're doing, now you keep that rhythm, except for you're doing, you're both trying to outfox each other on a disruptive cut that wasn't coming from that same direction. So it's still the same tempo, sort of. It's just that it's not choreographed. don't know if that helps or goes too tangentially, but when you describe that, you describe this, this tempo and this singular sided tempo, it reminded me of that. And I can do that with Polish Saber. I just don't know how I would do that with anything but that.
Sure.
How I would drill that. So definitely open to suggestions on that one.
Well, so I'm offering to everyone here that using this sort of framework and using this sort of sense of what the beat is and what, and performing your actions on the beat and putting the reactions in the and spot, or maybe performing the action on the and do so and one, right? Strength and take, that kind of approach, hopefully. But yeah, we'll definitely open the floor for ideas along those lines. But Kirk, go ahead.
Yeah, so with that same idea, John, that you were talking about, how having a tempo, setting that up, and then trying to slip in between that, I was talking to practitioners of Muay Boran, and with their art, even though it's not like a sword art, it's particularly an unarmed martial art, they actually do their competitions where they actually start off with people actually playing a beat, and the tempo starts slowly, and they use that first initial time of the fight to pick out that tempo. And as it speeds up, that's when people are starting to do like slips and counters in between that. So I just found it interesting that drawing parallels to not just our martial arts, but outside sources, and see how that dichotomy plays out as well. So that's just my 2 cents.
Sorry, what was it called? May I ask you, what was it called again? Would you mind posting a video somewhere or share that later?
Yeah, I'll do that. Yes.
Thank you.
So what I can tell you is that it's definitely true that we have examples of this type of thing happening across every martial art that I've kind of experimented with. We also have historical records. So like we have specific records of martial forms of this. So for instance, there's a book that talks about Scottish dirk, right? I'm not sure that anyone here practices Scottish dirk, right? That's a pretty niche HEMA.
Where's Chris when you need him?
Right. But like they have a couple of regional, so like beyond just like the whole art of Scottish dirk, they have like various regional dance forms that you play the game, and a lot of it is like, and I have the book out in my car that I was reading before this presentation. I could like run, but it's fine. But the bottom line is like the games that they're playing is like you strike, they strike, you catch, they catch, and now you're in this sort of tangle, and now you're playing these foot games. And what that immediately reminded me of is like judo, right? So in judo, there's this whole like pedagogy that is totally designed to fit your actions into this rhythm in this particular way, to make it so that you can perform your actions indes, right? And like working through the steps and the sequence of actions. And I'm not sure that they spend a ton of time talking about this sort of a continual rhythmic component, as opposed to like just sort of fitting just fitting the entire sequence of actions, and sort of the continuum being this long versus like playing a beat in the background and then putting your actions on a beat. So what I'm gonna offer is that what we've been doing at our school, and one of the ways that we've been trying to integrate this into our learning, is like we will put on a metronome, right? And it's important that we don't just, people are not just on the beat, but they're filling the subdivisions with their actions, right? So that they are actually working indes. And then we can raise the tempo or lower the tempo. Tempo, by the way, guys, when you're talking about fencing, they use the term tempo. The Italians, in particular, I'm not using it that way. I'm using it the musical way, which is like how many beats there are in a minute, right? So the rate of this, right? So here's something interesting. You guys are gonna love this, right? So if I go like this, right? Tell me if this is a slow tempo, or a fast tempo, or a medium tempo, right? So I'm gonna everyone can just listen to this, and you guys picture it in your head. Listen, close your eyes, listen, and picture in your head whether you think it's slow or fast or medium. Here we go. Okay, so everyone have an answer? Okay, so what's your answer? Liz, I'll ask you. What was that?
Sorry, had trouble finding the unmute. Slow?
Yeah. Did anyone think fast?
I did, but only because there was the 1, 2, 3, 4 between each clap.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, so when we're talking about, you heard all the beats in the middle, right? So, but the beat itself was only the clap, right? And
True.
so, sure. And did anyone else think fast, or have any other reason that you thought fast?
I thought fast mainly because as someone who does music, I'm thinking in terms of like, okay, is that phrase that you did, is that like a whole note phrase of the whole measure? Or that was just a sing, that was just the beat.
Just the beat. Yeah.
Okay, then slow. Sorry.
Well, so no, it's interesting. So everyone else. So I'm going to assume that everyone else thought slow. If you didn't, then you lost your opportunity to say that. So now, if I do this, ready? Is that a fast beat or a slow beat?
Fast.
Yeah, everyone agree that's fast.
Yeah.
Right? So like, what is it about the first one that makes it slow and the last one that makes it fast? That's a really interesting question to me, because there's no rule, right? No one ever said, hey, I'm going to teach you this right now. And this is kind of like moderate fast. I bet we would all agree that this is moderate fast. It's not even as fast. Like fast would be, that's real, that's fast. Like that's super fast, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. And I wonder where that comes from. Actually, I heard the second one is, oh, that's interesting. Kara heard the second one is slow. How about the third one? Did you hear that as fast? No, the third one is fast. Okay. So it's funny, like no one ever taught us this in school. We have no reason to share this perspective. And yet we kind of do, with some outliers, right? But yet we kind of do. Oh, tapping out the subdivision of the third. Yeah, I think I probably I probably did this in the wrong order. It may have been before I started pointing out all the subdivision stuff and indes, and maybe if I had initially started with where the beats were, that may have gotten everyone on the same page. But I think it's interesting that we all kind of agree. Now I'm gonna share something with you, right? So if we say this, right? And this is, and we call this a slow beat, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and we all agree that's slow, right? What do you think that is? I'll tell you what that is. That's about 60. That's about 60 BPM, right? So that means one. So if I'm doing 120, let me pull it up. I got a little BPM counter on my phone. I'll use that real quick. What does 120 sound like? Before I give you something BS.
That would be like a half-second beat.
Well, right. That's basically what it would be. So 120 is, and we called that like moderate, right? And then what was fast? Let's listen to that. So that's like up in the 200s, right? So, where does that come from? Why do we think of that as being fast? I think it actually it hints at what Jesse brought up before he left, which it comes from our bipedal nature, and it becomes from our contention with gravity. And I'll share more about that here in a second, but Charles, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree that in your ordering and the way you perceive it, mainly because when I hear the beat, I'm perceiving myself. At first I thought it was just stepping, but it's actually how quickly would I be able to shift my weight from my left foot to my right foot, or more to your point, bounce up and down at that pace, right? So I can dance with someone of with my own level up to 210, 220, which is really fast. It's not easy.
Ungodly fast, right?
Yeah, it is like I'm gonna need a break and a shower afterwards.
Yeah.
But that's because I'm taking every other beat and using a triple or just having it. I'm doing small things to speed it up, but there's an expectation of how my weight is supposed to be bouncing up and down the entire time. And so what I see as if you're asking the question, how do I know that that's fast? It's because it's close to my ceiling. It's close to my ceiling of how physically fast can I actually bounce up and down, right?
Right.
Right. that, you know, at about like 240, I can't even bounce up and down fast enough for that.
Right.
And then at lower speeds, I can't walk at that pace. Like I'd have to do something unnatural, or I have to change my gait. But
Right.
that kind of that physical intuition forms my intuition, my musical intuition for what's fast. If that's
Yeah,
kind
no,
of where
I
you're
think
going.
I think that's totally correct. So often when I bring this up, my students will say, and again, this is in a musical context, my students will say, "Oh, maybe the heartbeat," right? Which superficially sounds pretty plausible, right? So like, you know, what is a fast heartbeat? A fast heartbeat is like 160, right? That's like I'm working out fast heartbeat, right? Maybe 120 is like a leisurely jog, or if I'm at that's my resting heart rate, I probably need to see a doctor, right? And then like a resting heart rate where you've just been chilling is like 60, right? Between 60 and 80 or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. And so like I think that, you know, I think it's totally plausible. And there are no rules for this, right? It's just what we're trying to, you know, how we're trying to conceive of it. But I like the way, I like thinking about it in terms of our movement, and thinking about it in terms of our sort of upper bound in terms of movement, because it's a question of what can we achieve given that rhythmic paradigm, right? So like the other thing that I bring this up for, and this is really important, is that, you know, the way that we train HEMA is generally too fast for our bodies, right? So we very often and I say we, I mean, you know, the community is huge, and what even is a community? We can make this a question of sociology, all right? But you know, we'll just sort of make an assumption about it right now. And so the community fence is very, very fast, which leads me to wonder to what degree they're working indes, right? It leads me to wonder, right? There are two questions of timing, right? There's the speed of an action, okay? And that's a question of what happens first. Who's the first to reach the finish line? And then there's the deliberate placement of an action on a temporal continuum, right? And that doesn't require, and that's not a question of how fast, you know, and who can reach it first. That's a question of how carefully we've trained our bodies to integrate our movement on that broader continuum and put our actions in the right time, as opposed to just in the right place as fast as we can. And I think that there's a value in that. Now, let's talk about how we set a tempo. Okay, so my fencing students will ask, very often, more advanced fencing students will start to kind of encroach this meta, this way of conceiving of our actions. And they say, so it seems like, at some point, fencers say, it seems like there's an upper bound to how fast I should move. Right? It seems like there's an upper bound to how fast I should move. How fast should I do? You know, we would say, like, if you do a zucken, right, you should do that zucken as fast as you can so that you can beat your opponent. And then you get to a point in your fencing where you realize, okay, it's not about that. So at what point do I have to slow down, or do I think about maybe not doing it as fast as I can? Where does that upper bound happen? And there's a reason for that. And I'm going to give you an example. So for instance, if we're bound, so I'm bound with my opponent, and my opponent strengthens, and I'm at such a distance where Durchwechseln is a feasible action for me, right? So it could be that I Durchwechseln into a thrust, right? So I'm bound, my opponent strengthens, I dip my point underneath and shoot the point, right? And hit the thrust, right? It could be that I do that. My opponent can be fencing with a lot of indes, with a lot of fuhlen, right? So very, very attentive to the type of behavior, and they can feel me falling off. And so the moment that I dip my point underneath, they're already covering the line on the other side, because they know that they have to get their point over, right? Now we're talking K+1. Now we're talking to what, you know, we're talking how far can I outread my opponent, right? And I say, okay, I'm going to outread my opponent. I know that in his strengthening, I'm going to durchwechseln and he's going to perceive my durchwechseln. And so I'm going to double durchwechseln, right? So now I'm here, he goes to strengthen, I durchwechseln, he goes to strengthen the other side, I'm already durchwechseln, and I hit him with the thrust. And ain't it pretty, right? Raise your hand if you've done something like that at one point in your life ever, or some version of that in any martial art, right? It's a great feeling, right? Good, Charles raised his hand. Yeah, it's a great feeling. You can't do better than that, okay? But here's the problem with that. When can I do my second durchwechseln?
Before you finish the first.
That's when it's when it's possible for me to do it, but when is it tactically appropriate for me to do it?
After your opponent has reacted.
I can't do it until he comes back to cover the line. What happens if my opponent strengthens and I double durchwechseln and I shoot the point right into his strong geometry? Right? I'm going to get stabbed in the face probably. Right? So you have to tether your actions to the speed that your opponent, to the tempo or the rhythm of your opponent. And you have to act appropriately given that framework, or else you can outread your opponent to the point sticking in your face. Go ahead, Kirk.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to put my hand up. I was just readjusting my camera. I apologize.
No, not at all.
There's a similar concept in social dance where you do, I guess they're like trick moves, but like lead and follow in social dance is like a very generally clear language. Like the lead will do a physical action and the follow will perceive it and then will move through it. But there are a lot of moves that the lead does where they lead the follow down a direction and they then take an unexpected direction that is based off of them, sometimes using their momentum, sometimes changing it up, kind of like a variation on the theme. And a lot of those require you to actually know where the follow is, not where they should be, and to really just sometimes wait to see whether they actually follow the initial lead.
Yeah.
But I mean, in that atmosphere, it's more collaborative, but certainly you do need to wait and the tempo there is not determined by the music, it's determined by the speed of your partner.
Yeah, I mean, and that is just so important. I think of it like boxing, right? So in boxing we do pad drills, right? So what are the pad drills? The pad drills, my opponent calls out he basically calls out a sequence of actions, right? And I'm boom, 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 right? Pop, 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 pop. And often you'll try and match the tempo match the rhythm of the person calling out the shots, right? So he goes pop, 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 you go jab, 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 and you try and hit it in that rhythm, right? There's another way of doing it that what you do instead is that you just have a sequence of patterns, a sequence of, or a pattern of sequences or whatever, like set a set program of the each action, and you do it with enough time where you can see it, right? So you can see he's doing this, so this action means uppercut, right? If he does this, this action means jab. If he does this, it means cross. This means uppercut. This means hook. This means block, all that stuff, and you just know what it means in your mind. And what's really cool about that is when you do this, you can go boom, 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 and you can mess with the tempo, right? So you can mess with the tempo, and what that does is it slows your boxer down. If you're holding pads, you're messing with the tempo, and if they're doing it well, they're still doing it with perfect form. So they're going from ba 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 boom 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 boom. You know what I'm saying? And they're doing the exact same thing that they would be doing, but just at a slower pace. And what that gets to is this whole idea of being able to control your body. So in various proportion, right? So we have this idea that actions happen across a continuum of time, but also that continuum grows and contracts. And we have to govern our behaviors, we have to govern our actions in proportion to the degree to which it grows or the degree to which it contracts, right? So that it can look smooth, right? And that's what people are saying when they say smooth, right? That's when someone says slow is smooth, smooth is fast. What they're saying is learn to govern your ability to manage the proportion of each subsequent part or each subdivided part of an action, right? And it's interesting in music, or probably in dance too, that there are invariably some things that they're easier to do fast than slow, or
Yes.
easier to do fast than slow, right?
Yeah.
But we would argue that that's just because you're not doing it, right? That's just because you're not doing it. You know what I mean? Like,
I think it depends on what it just changes, right? Like one can say, like in dance specifically, right? You have in ballet, you have a bar and that's your warm up. And then through the bar, you have these slow, like progressive, continuous things to get you warmed up. And then you have like a piece allegro at the bar, which is like your small, quick movements. And then you move to center floor where you do these small, quick movements again, but you also in between that have a center floor adagio, a center floor small, continuous movement, right? And really it just kind of hit me when you were saying you go for like these big and these small things, like they're really just variations of each other. So like a bat ma is a bat ma, like a beating or a stretching of the foot is the same thing. Like and bat ma is beating and tendu is stretching of the foot. Like I get it, sure, guys. But like for the sake of like breaking this out, right? Like you have, and I'm just gonna like you have like a stretch and then a close, then you have a jeté where it's out and then it's closed, and then you have like these little tiny petite bat mas you do where you just like do around your ankle, and it's nuts. And then you have the ones where you're up in the air, and the faster you do them, the lower to the ground you need to be in order to stay in tempo with the music. But when you're doing them slowly, you can stretch them out and make them these big, continuous, long movements, right? And like really focus on the mechanics of it, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. I think one of the things that I'll bring up with regards to this idea of doing one action slow, one action fast, is this idea that sometimes doing it fast masks parts of the sequence, parts of the movement pattern that maybe you're not as good at, right? And you can kind of get over those humps because you're doing it quickly enough to not have to really reconcile the fact that you need work in those areas, right? But also, I want to go back to this idea of the proportion of the act. So we need to have strength through the entire movement pattern, not just the strength to get us from one part of the movement pattern to another, but strength to coordinate that part of the movement pattern on this temporal continuum that we keep on coming back to, right? To be sure that we're spending as much time in that part of the action as we need to in relation to all of the rest of the parts of the action, right? Because actions are complex, right? Especially when we're talking about the sword. What do you got with moving with the sword? You got your arms moving, your hands are moving, your wrists are moving at the wrist, moving at the elbow, moving at the shoulder. You got movement in the hips, you got movement in the feet, you got weight is shifting, right? Backs, sometimes your back is arching or hinging, right? You're hinging at your hips, you got all sorts of things are happening with the sword at once. And some of that is like happening together. So for instance, like I may be extending my arms and hinging at the hips simultaneously. And so I have to learn that movement pattern specifically. And then, later in the action is when my lead foot is going to raise or my rear foot is going to raise and my lead foot is going to follow. My weight is going to shift from my right side. So I might be doing this. My weight is shifting from my rear leg to my forward leg. My hips are turning out so that I'm able to accommodate that shift in weight. And my arms are coming forward simultaneously. And then there's a subsequent step forward, right? And all of that has to happen in sequence. And there's a proportion of the amount of time that you spend in any one part of that sequence that makes the action one fluid, smooth action that we can call one thing, a zorn or whatever, right? And so I'm gonna basically tie the discussion up here, which is that when we think of the function that dance serves, is it's a way of isolating the fact that when we move in space, but also we move in time. And we need to learn to coordinate our bodies, not just so that they can do a thing or perform a thing. Like if that's all that we were doing, then it would be the fastest fencer who wins every time, right? But instead we have to learn to feel, we have to learn to interpret, get into the pocket with our opponent, right? And that only happens, thank you, Angelica. It was great to see you. That only happens, that you can only get into the pocket if you're trying to be sensitive. And in my view, that's what fuhlen is, right? So fuhlen is your ability to get into the pocket with your partner. And the ability, and not just that, but there's more than just perception, right? So you can't have fuhlen, it's fundamental to fuhlen, is to be able to move in that time, right? So you have to be able to, your body has to be strong enough to control itself so that it can move in the same time and get into the pocket. Not just your mind, but your body has to be able to get into the pocket with your partner. And then think about working indes only through fuhlen, only through that perception and the ability to move in that rhythm. Then you can start acting indes your opponent's actions. And that's when your actions can start being successful. And so dance, right, as practiced historically, it makes a lot of sense to me when I see dances on this list, because we haven't even looked at the particular particular movement patterns of the dances at the time, and that's stuff that lots of people have done some work on it. Jess Finley did like some really great stuff with regards to the specific, like where you put your feet in the steps, and she's got all the names of the steps and stuff. It's really cool. You should check her out. Everyone should be giving all of your attention to Jess Finley. I think I probably have said that every time that we that we do these lectures. But I think for me, the most important thing is to understand is that walking away from this with an understanding of rhythm, with an understanding of what a beat is, what a subdivision is, and how we can coordinate our movements across a rhythmic paradigm, and that we can start to line up our actions as things that are happening in beats, and actions indes as things that are happening in the subdivisions of beats, so that we can time them correctly, so that we can understand the proportion. And then the other thing is that we tether our speed to our opponent. So it's not a race to see who gets to hit the other guy first, that rather we have to fit our actions into the tempo and the rhythm that our opponent gives us. And with that, I'll open the floor for questions or comments or anything else.
Did you find any similarities with your study of dance and tempo and timing and indes with your ring and experimentation? Was it easier to translate there as opposed to with the sword?
So I think that what's cool about ringing is it really makes you aware of foot position, right? In a way that fencing often doesn't. Like, so because we're so far apart with our foot position, that it's hard for us to think, okay, I've got my lead foot on his lead foot's outside or inside. I've got my rear foot on his lead foot's outside or rear foot's outside or inside. Because you're so far away, you can't like directly see it. Whereas like the ring and stuff, it's pretty clear even in the manuscripts and manuals what foot position is required to perform a technique correctly, right? So you can say like, I need to have inside foot position with my near or far foot, right? Mm-hmm. And so in those cases, basically I think certainly the timing and the indes stuff, I'm able to really like, I love that I can put my footwork inside of the footwork of my opponent. And we get back to that, the Dirk dancing, or even just like the judo stuff. It's like, it's very much the movement of the feet that you're watching that is where the indes is happening. Whereas with swordsmanship, that's a little bit more abstracted and you kind of have to work backwards from the blade work, right? Mm-hmm. So like in ringing, the feet become the blades, right? In a way, right? So that whereas you're watching and fitting the movement of the blades inside of each other, now you're kind of doing that with the feet. Of course, you need like the underhook or you know, the over, you know, whatever.
Yeah,
what,
there
you
are
know,
certain little things.
yeah.
But like, so I asked because when I was messing with my concept of indes and how best to like translate it to beginners or other people that were like struggling with how to put it into words, it's like so often where you'll be in a position and you're like, oh, that's when I should do this. Like, yeah, you recognize the indes, but the moment is gone now because it took you too long to recognize it.
Right.
So now we have a different indes we have to work within.
Right. Yeah. So when it comes to that, that's a really challenging thing as an instructor to kind of impart to a new student. That's like, you know, you only get the one chance. The things happen on this continuum, and you have to hit it in the moment, or else it's not there anymore. And certainly, like, I love the 5 words framework for that specifically, right? So the 5 words framework give us a perspective that we can very clearly articulate when these moments are happening, right? So like there are acts of strengthening and weakening, and you have to attack within those acts, and you have to attack the weakening as it's being created, right? So you can't attack someone when they're weak. I mean, you can, but they can defend that, right? But if they're acting to strengthen in one direction, that's the moment, that's the opportunity to work into the new weakness that they give you as they're doing so. So I'm a big fan of that 5 words framework. But you are right, you know, and maybe this new perspective, or this alternative perspective of like happening on the beat and happening inside the beat might be a good way of being able to impart that. It's like, okay, we have this happening, 1, 2, 1 and 2 and 1. So make sure you're doing it and ready. 1, 2, and there it is, right? And you can get a metronome going on in the back and really break things down and fit them in. I'll go back when you just bring up ringing. I love the ringing for the footwork, and I think that's also why like the footwork is pretty clearly articulated often in Messer, right? So like in longsword, because it's kind of abstracted because we're so far apart, versus Messer where things are very, very close. You're like, you know, you're basically close enough to see where all the feet should go. And there are relationships with the particular dance movements that we have recorded stuff from the 1450s, Domenico or whatever, that tell us how we, you know, pivot on the back foot and that kind of thing. I think, yeah. So I think there's definitely a usefulness there with regards to that movement, and sort of as it relates to wrestling. Any other questions? Any
Did you
questions? Go ahead.
Sorry, I have like, so in preparation for this, I like thought of a bunch. Anybody else jump in, seriously?
Yeah, had a bit of a question. Do you think playing music during, say, a practice sparring or practice might be helpful in giving someone the idea of it without causing the sort of distraction of a metronome? Because it can be very tempting to go on the beat or to spend too much effort listening for the beat and then trying to hit just after.
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point, because like part of what we said was that we have to be in the pocket with our partner, right? And then the other part of what we said is like we have to be on rhythm. We have to fit our actions into this particular rhythm. And so like I would say that I wouldn't recommend making all of your practices focused on that rhythmic component. You know, most often I'll say what I tell my music students, which is practice for perfection in an arrhythmic paradigm, right? So practice to get everything right in the correct sequence so that you can perform that sequence on command. And then once you have it on command, then you can start fitting it into a rhythmic context. So, you know, when people really have a strong command over a particular technique, right, then, you know, it may be beneficial to spend just a little bit of time with the metronome or some kind of, and it could be music or a metronome. What I would suggest is that with a metronome, you can set the beat, right? And so you can accommodate where people's needs are. Whereas if you're picking songs, and it's not impossible. You can like carefully and artistically, artfully, pick the songs that you want to choose, that that cater to various people and where they are along their personal journeys. And maybe for someone like Brent, it's like death metal, and for someone like Joe, it's like waltzes from the 15th century.
Thanks, I'll try
right?
that.
Did I get that right? Go ahead, Charles.
Oh no, I just no, I actually did have this thought on slow movement and why it's so hard. A lot of it is like, yeah, you can kind of futz through and hide a lot of your movement, and you can use your momentum. And I think the other part of it also is that just trying to rely again on dance, because that's the theme of the night. Ordinarily, I would not just like keep talking about this, but one of the things I've noticed is that a lot of people have a lot of trouble dancing slow that extends beyond physical movement. So that if someone's dancing say 100 BPM and they're used to dancing maybe 140, there's so much time in between that they have time to second guess themselves. They have time to psych themselves out. They have time to overread their partner's movements. They have time to overthink how, like, oh man, we are way too close. Like, I can't believe I'm actually touching someone, or like it just gets weird.
Can confirm, bar adage and center floor adagios were the worst ones for getting in your head. You're moving so slowly that everything just runs through.
Yeah, and in at those moments, you really need to be actually like into the music, and otherwise you're not going to be able to shut your brain down, and you'll do weird. You'll just look weird. Whereas if it's kind of tempo that's closer to your physical limit, because you're just physically focused on hitting that tempo, you don't have much thought to derail your other movements. So yeah, that's just kind of a side observation to that kind of slow movement thing.
I think that's good. So the way that I think about it is basically like in terms of strength. This is just me personally, right? So like I have a different perspective on it, but I think that yours is also 100% valid and very, very useful. I tend to think about it in terms of strength, like, it's sometimes easier to perform a fast, explosive movement than it is to perform a slow movement, right? So if we just think about like in terms of a bench press, right? Like exploding out of the hole is going to result in a higher, if you're doing that, and if you're thinking about exploding out of the hole, right, that's going to result in a higher load that you can carry rather than like going slow through the whole movement pattern, right? Why is that? Because you are putting more strain on the muscles. The more time under tension, the more time under load, the harder it is after a while to be able to lift it, right? So, so if we think about it in those terms, the movement, like when you have to slow stuff down, you're asking your body, like, hey, I need you to be engaged longer than I would have asked you to be engaged otherwise, and your muscles might be like, yo, dude, what are you doing? I need to not be engaged right now. We need to get through this so I can go to you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I do agree that, and so the reason I brought that up wasn't to like say, well, I have a different way. What I think it's the same phenomena, right? So now it's not the muscles that are under tension, but it's your psychology that's under tension. You know what I'm saying? It's like, like all of that is energy that's required, and the way that you get better at it, right? So, and this is the truth about anything. The way that you get better at it is practice, right? Is like training your body to be able to do it in every sense, right? To be able to do it slowly, to be able to do it the same proportion very fast, to be able to do it at a moderate speed, to develop a command and a mastery over the way that you use your body. And not just the way that you do things, but the way that you do them across time. the way that you do them across time on a continuum, and the way that you do them in proportion with each other, right?
Yeah.
All of that is going to strengthen your muscles, all of the muscles that are required to do the little things, and including the mind, right? Strengthen your ability to focus and concentrate. But also, you know, half of getting stronger, I think we talked about this last time, half of getting stronger is learning what muscles not to use, right?
Yeah.
Because if you think about like performing a lift, right? Or running, you know, think about running a marathon, you know, you need like a lot of stuff you need to have as relaxed as possible, right? You know, you'd never make it if everything shoulders up was tight, right? You need to be as relaxed and loose. And that's true about fencing too. Like everybody's first, I don't care what kind of shape you're in. And you can tell me if I'm lying, but if this is your experience, then I wouldn't doubt it, right? Every single person I've ever introduced into fencing, regardless of what kind of shape they were in, after their first sparring session, they were completely exhausted. Every single person. And I don't care if they ran marathons, every single person. Does anyone disagree with that? Anyone have a different experience? Just curious.
Not disagree, but I honestly felt, because I tensed my muscles so much, I felt like I'd been hit by a car, and I have been.
Yeah. And so my rationale for that, I'm not a sports scientist, but my rationale for that is that you're so exhausted, not because of the demands are actually quite minimal for fencing, right? You're just moving back and forth, doing a few things with your arm. The weight is like 3 pounds. Thank you so much, Kara. It was great to see you. And we're wrapping up now, so I hope you got something out of it. Hope you enjoyed. So it's my view that most of that comes from just how so much of our body is not relaxed the way that it should be. And part of training, part of that learning curve is teaching your body what muscles it needs, right? What muscles it needs to engage and be tight and firm, and what all you need to just relax and leave alone and let work for you, right? Only engage your skeleton as much as it needs to so that it can be oriented in the direction of the bad guy. Go ahead, Joe.
So I think this is in line with what you're talking about, but I totally had the same experience. First time you spar, it's exhausting. But after I'd been doing that for a little while, I had gotten okay, and sparring wasn't as strenuous anymore. And then I sparred Jake for the first time. And then that was exhausting in its own right? I was wiped out just after a few passes with him.
Yeah.
And you know, there are a couple ways I suppose we could try to fit that into this paradigm. One might be a tempo thing. One might be, I just wasn't as good as I thought it was, and I needed to be relaxing more.
Well, yeah, I mean, so if we just think about it from a psychological perspective, right, there's a lot of weight on your shoulders, right? I don't know if you guys have been following the whole Jake Paul, Ben Askren thing, right? I hope you guys have no idea what I'm talking about.
Can't say that I do.
Not included.
What is that?
Nope.
No, this is great. So in the world of professional combat sports, there's a YouTuber who's a total punk. His fan base is between 11 and 14, and they're all males. And he is just the biggest punk. And he's been talking so much shit. And he got a professional MMA fighter to agree to a boxing match with him. The problem is the fighter that he got to, because obviously everyone wants to see this guy get his ass kicked. The fighter that he chose to do this is notoriously terrible at boxing, right? So why they, so he does have credibility at MMA, but that's because he's a wrestler. His whole career is based on wrestling. He's one of the highest decorated Olympic wrestler, and they picked him so that this guy, the YouTuber, can do well against a pro MMA fighter, right? I am only like casually interested in this. I don't plan on watching the fight. But I do think it's interesting because I think that the YouTuber has a rude awakening. I think there's a good chance he's a better boxer than the MMA fighter. And I think there's a good chance that in a regular sparring session that he would be able to do his work and maybe come out victorious in whatever casual friendly exchange that they would have had. But it's a different thing when you're doing it in front of a couple million people and you're scared shitless, right? I expect that after that fight, the YouTuber is going to feel a lot like you did, Joe, after your first time fencing with Jake, right? And I'm not, I can't know. I wasn't there, and I'm not you, but I wonder to what degree that had something to do with it, right? Now, that probably manifested through losing control of your body, right? Like you probably were so psychologically overwhelmed by the prospect of fencing Jake that you lost to a degree, right? I'm sure you didn't like totally embarrass yourself, but you lost to a degree control over parts of your body that you used to have kind of a command over because you were so psychologically overwhelmed by what you were getting into. And then so what you did was probably what was natural, which is tense up and start moving, start requiring a lot more energy to do some of the things that you required less energy to do before. How does that sound?
No, I think that makes some sense. I mean, from what I remember of the match, first thing out of the gate was as Vera could do a Duplern from him that seemed like he teleported. So after that, I was pretty on edge. So yeah, that sounds about right.
I mean, it's something anyway. It's a way of thinking about it. So I think a lot of, we have to develop strength, but we also have to develop psychological strength. And I think that this whole, how we started on this was this, the question of tempo, right? So how fast and how slow and what kind of rhythmic framework we're performing our actions. We should be training our body to do them across a variety of rhythmic frameworks and rhythmic idioms. Ashes.
Yeah, I was listening to the rhythmic thing, and I'm sorry I came in late, and you might have talked about this earlier, but how do you feel about the distance and the range of Zornhau as a concept? And I'm saying this in the framework of the way that you're saying about rhythm and such, because our club, or my club, has recently looked at the idea of Zornhau not being as close as we thought it was. And listening to your lecture about rhythm, it seems like maybe it would be a good way to attain the rhythm or create the rhythm of the fight by opening your strike at a distance where 4 or 5 inches tops of the swords are touching. And then you can control the rhythm of your opponent slightly better, or you can both get in each other's pockets so you don't make ridiculous actions that get you doubled.
Well, so I think you bring up a good point, right? So let's think about it like this. The closer I am, the less time it takes to perform successful hitters, right? So like you get to a point where things are going like that. The farther out you are, the more time an action takes and the more time you're afforded to perform an action. So I think about this in the tradition of like Meyer or some of the Bolognese stuff. They describe actions that you do at range, right? Actions that you do in the Sufechten or outside of the critical distance where we would be able to hit our opponent. Those tend to be very broad and provoking actions, right? So Meyer reserves that for the provokers, right? So I'm going to do a big action out in the Sufechten. If I'm in the Krieg, right, and I do a big action to draw my sword back, what's going to happen? You're going to get stabbed in the face is what's going to happen, right? Because I'm giving my opponent a long opportunity, right, to fit his action within, right? So the more time my action takes, the more time he has to perceive and to fit his response within my action. And so if I'm doing huge, big actions inside a measure, inside of the critical distance where my opponent can hit me, then it's going to be very easy for my opponent to do so. That being said, right, sometimes performing actions outside of that critical distance, so in the Sufechten, where you're bound at the tips, as Meyer says, you're bound sort of at the tips, or You're a fathom apart, which who knows, but probably meant something around six feet, right? So if you're there and you're doing big actions, well, what is that doing now? That's setting the rhythm. And it's setting the rhythm in a way that's advantageous to you, right? Because we say that we want to be able to train our rhythm. We want to train our bodies to move in a variety of rhythmic idioms, right? That's what we open this with. But that being said, there's a best one, right? There's an optimal one, and that's going to be different for everybody. And so very often when I'm fencing, and I use this advice because Meyer describes these actions like these are provokers and they're very big, and they're very big for a very particular reason, right? Because what it does is the slower you take to perform your initial action that's in the Sufechten range, the easier it is to slow your opponent down, right? Because if they're fencing indes, they have to tether their speed to your actions. And so you can begin by provoking outside of the critical distance at a rhythm or at a tempo, right? That's sort of most advantageous to you. Does that answer the question? And does that make sense to everybody? How do we feel about it? Okay. All right. Anyone else have anything?
I did want to say something from earlier.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Matthew.
Don't worry about it. Everybody else had like the super cool insights, and I was learning a whole lot, so I wasn't saying anything. But somebody wanted to go. I'm sorry.
No.
Nope,
You're
you
up,
go.
Matthew.
You go.
Okay, so I guess I'll start this off with is anybody familiar with the name Monty Ohm? He's the animator behind the show Ruby, spelled with a W. Don't ask why. And a couple other animations that you can find on YouTube.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Surrounded by nerds, Matt. Come on.
Okay, cool. I'm just making sure because I don't know, but anyway, apparently I was watching a video that was a how to put it? It was like a study into his whole the reason why his fight sequences look the way they do. So, and it's because Monty isn't just a martial artist. He also used to be, before he passed away, one of the best DDR players in the world, Dance Dance Revolution. So this dude had an extremely good understanding of timing and tempo. And you see tempo mostly executed in say kung fu and wushu movies, because especially the old ones because you could see the 1, 2, 3, 4 as they're going through the motions. And then you see in more contemporary Western movies, you just have two guys that are slugging it out because the concept of tempo isn't really there as much. But Monty manages to bring, I guess, order to the chaos and manages to create these beautiful, high-flying, ridiculously fast animated fight sequences because of this understanding of time, this deep understanding of timing. And I was trying to mimic that in out here in real life, because I actually just recently agreed to get dragged to a lightsaber club once I'm vaccinated. And I also realized in people that do these lightsaber club things, it's just as much like martial arts and knowing how to move your body and everything, but tempo is is more important than that, I would even argue, because you need to make sure that you're in the same time as the other person performing with you. Otherwise, one of you is going to get smacked in the face with a plastic stick, and nobody likes that, unless, that's what you're here for. But that was my bit. And I was wondering if anybody else had experience with choreography or animation and wanted to weigh in on that.
So I did have the opportunity to choreograph a bit while I was coming up in the dance world. When I was younger, part of the curriculum we would do was one of our classes was creative movement, where you just learn how to move in the weirdest ways possible. You work with people you've never met, or people you don't go to school with, people you know nothing about, and were given a piece of music and you are meant to choreograph to that music. Now, one could say, oh, easy, choreograph to the music, no problem. But in order to make it more complicated, it was, your concept is this, your concept is that, you're conveying this emotion, your movement is walking, so you can only walk, convey sloth, and your music is like this happy-go-lucky, like peppy sounding modern stuff, and you're like, how do I do that, right? So you then have to find the tempo, you have to find the rhythm, and if it's sloth, you might want to play on the downbeat or the offbeat, or maybe go with a juxtaposition and go with the whatever it is, right? You're on the main beat and you're highlighting the contrast between someone who's peppy and normal, as opposed to someone who is depressed and sloth and slow and dragging or melting. Like there's all these other concepts you can build within that choreography, right? But I guess in a way you can drag that into fencing if you really want to reach for strings. You can tell how a fencer is feeling about based on how they walk away, how they enter, how they pause, when they pause, where they pause, how long they pause, or how they respond to you. Do they flinch? Do they immediately go to cover? Like there's all this, like Charles would call it a psychological game, and I kind of agree with it, but there's like a feeling out process that happens in the same way that would happen in a group while you're discussing all of these concepts to build this choreography. The only difference is in a fencing bout, you don't have the ability to speak. So you have to read all of these contextual clues within each exchange.
That makes sense. I know Ariana and I's old fencing coach called épée less. It's technique is good, but mind games are better. At least in the context of épée.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing too. Let's talk about that real quick, and then I think we're basically at the end. So I'm gonna say a few things to wrap up. I want to start with that, and then we're gonna revisit art, and then we're gonna wrap up. So what we have real quick. So technique is good, mind games are better. So what that talks to me about is this question of art, right? So there's a distinction that we make between art and craft, and this is a distinction made historically, right? So it seems to me, now it's hard to know because I'm not, a scholar in this field, and I haven't read every single book that anyone's ever written on it, but it seems to me that when we think of craft, what we're thinking about is sort of the technical skills, right? The technical abilities, the study that you develop a mastery in, and that's the craft. And then the art goes back to this question of decisions, right? So how we artfully apply the craft that we've developed. And that's going to be circumstantial, right? So that's going to be based on the environment that we're trying to contend with, because the truth of the world is, right, we just have ourselves, right? So it's just us, our autonomy of ourselves, and all the rest of the world around us, right? That's the truth of the world. The state of the world is I have my autonomy of self, and I have to contend with the environmental phenomena around me, right? And so how I engage with that world and what circumstances I find myself in, what types of problems I have to contend with, right? And so when we think about like what a fencing bout is, right? What are we trying to achieve? And there's a couple of different things that we can be trying to achieve. We can try to achieve a mastery of the craft, right? So perform the techniques, right? Develop the ability, the body movement, all the different ways that we do it. And that's the craft. And then we have the art, right? So what the art is the types of decisions that we make, and they can be tactical, right? We think of art as being emotive, but doesn't need to be. We can think of art as being a set of using our creativity, our human creativity and imagination to be tactical. What kind of action am I going to perform against my opponent? I know he's going to respond this way to this action, and so I'm not going to do that, right? Or maybe I use that information because I have a command of my art, right? I'm able to apply my creativity and imagination to solve the complex and interesting problem of going up against a non-cooperative opponent who doesn't want me to win, right? And so that's the art part of the fencing, right? you hear the term martial arts, and there are many martial arts. I would call them martial arts, but they don't have the sparring component, right? They don't have the non-cooperative. I'm contending without external phenomena, and I have to make artistic choices. Or we use artistic now. Artistic means fine performing arts. So I'm not going to use artful choices. I need to make artful decisions about the way that I'm going to contend with this environmental phenomenon, which in this case is a bad guy, right? Who is trying to not let me win. And there's a lot of ways that we can do that, right? We can come at it from a very like modern scientific-y approach, where it's like, I'm going to do X. I am here. I will do X, Y, or Z. I am now here, and I will branch down this decision tree, and I will follow it to the ends of the earth, right? Or we might approach it by saying, I'm going to get in this guy's head. I know he wants to take control in the Sufestion. He wants before anything happens, as soon as we hit the Sufestion, he's going to try and take control, because that's his game. He's an aggressive person, and he wants to, do this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stay outside the Sufestion, and then as soon as I cross that line, I'm immediately going to go in for an attack. And that's going to throw him off his game. I'm not going to spend any time in that middle ground where he wants to make his move, right? And what that's going to do is it's going to completely debate. It's going to throw him so far off his game that he's not even going to be able to approach the question artfully. He's just going to be flailing, right? Probably lose physical control over his body, right? That's another way of approaching it artfully. So I agree with whoever it was that said, mind games are better. I do agree with that. But I also want to say, like, developing your whole complete art, right? That's one part of it, right? But I think often we start there and we haven't given ourselves enough mastery over, a complete way of approaching the fight, for instance, or whatever, where we can actually like compose a beautiful sonnet, right? Like compose a beautiful aria, and have like different directions that we can take, and it makes sense. And we get into this, I'm just going to do the mind games thing, and maybe we're not working with much, right? So like I go back to, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, I go back to John Coltrane. So when I first started thinking about this question of art, I thought of it in the context of jazz. I'm a kid at this point, right? So I'm in high school, thinking about John Coltrane in high school, right? John Coltrane would sometimes he would start a song and he would just play one note forever, right? He just play like a B flat, right? Like the song would start, the piano would be going, the drums would be going, bass line, and it'd just be like, and that's what you'd hear, right? John Coltrane just laying on that B flat, right? Was that an artful B flat? The reason that was an artful B flat wasn't because he played a B flat. Literally anybody could do it. It's the first thing that you learn how to do when you're playing an instrument. Play this one note, right? That's not why it was artful. It was artful because of all the other things he could do. It was artful because of all the things in the world that John Coltrane could do. He chose that B flat because that was the perfect B flat for that perfect moment in time where that was the appropriate note for him to play, and anything else wouldn't have been as perfect. That's what made it artful, right? So it wasn't just the choice, but it was the mastery. But it wasn't just the mastery either, right? It was the deliberate nature of his behavior. It was the deliberate nature of the fact that he chose that B flat. Of all the things that he could play, it was that B flat. And that was perfect. And that's what made it artful to me. And I realized that, but I didn't understand any of this other stuff, but I understood back then that that's the difference, because literally anyone could have played it, but because it was him, because of what he could have done instead, that's what spoke to me. Okay. All right. I'm gonna be done, because we will keep this going forever. And my dog has been locked in my bedroom accidentally for a long time. He probably peed on my floor, so I'm gonna go clean that up. All right. Thank you so much, guys, and hopefully we'll see you around the block, and I hope you had a great time coming to my lecture series on training like a medieval knight.
And thank you for lecturing. I learned a lot, and I hope to actually, you know, meet all of you once this plague is over, because Ariane has been gushing about y'all since she got back from DC.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, James.
All right.
Thank you,
Really
James.
appreciate it.
Have a good
I
night.
feel like this touches on LeCookner's step back and stab people in chest. That B flat thing, the B flat thing you just said. Because
You're gonna have to share it with them. I gotta go. I'll talk to you later. Thanks.
All right, talk to you later.
Bye, James.